About 2 months ago, my best friend and I made plans to hang out. She's been my best friend for more than 10 years. I'm a year older, and she used to break down in crowded places and was bullied when we were in school together, so I am fiercely protective of her. Seriously, you fuck with this girl, you fuck with me. The state we live in has a high rate of human trafficking, which makes me even more vigilant and particularly sensitive to this event. Our favorite mall is a great place to hang out on weekdays, as it's not too particularly crowded. That's the way we like it. There's so much to do there that when we go, we usually pick a movie time and spend the time before it shopping, snacking, and exploring. We were there all day, and she was pretty aloof that day. I, however, felt on edge and unfriendly. I'm usually not like that, but chalked it up to just being a bit cranky after getting rained on. My mom has drilled it into me to always be aware of my surroundings, and I've always been good at remembering names and faces. So when we saw people in the mall more than once, I usually remembered when I saw them, how many times I saw them, and where. Bestie and I stopped at one of those shops to get smoothies and sat down at a table to take a rest. It's a big mall, and we were walking all day, so I welcomed the rest. While we were in line, I saw a man cut through the shop and walk behind us. The shop was a corner shop with open entryways, so when I say cut through, he walked between us and a pillar. There was that on-edge feeling again. I became tense and immediately checked to make sure I hadn't been pickpocketed. I had all my stuff, so I tried to relax, and we were waiting for our drinks to be made, and I saw the man walk by us again, this time slower and around the pillar. There was nothing particularly scary about him. Average height, build, kind of a dad bod, jeans, dark button-up, short haircut, but I immediately just wanted him to go away. I told Bestie that I would grab us a table. I sat where she and I could see one another while she waited for our drinks, and I kept my eyes on her in case he came back. While she was getting our drinks, I saw the guy come back. This time, not alone. He was with 2 other men. They all seemed similar in age, all wearing jeans, one in a denim jacket and hat, the other in a white shirt with a gold chain on his neck, and the cologne they wore was overwhelming. They kind of made me think of middle-aged men who go to clubs to hit on girls. However, my internal voice was screaming, these guys are fucking pimps. Bestie joined me at the table, and we immediately started on our drinks and cookies we bought at our favorite cookie shop. I relaxed a moment, and while I was happily munching away, guess who comes around the corner again? I wait until they pass, and then lean in and tell Bestie what's going on. Me. Don't be alarmed, but those guys keep walking by us. Bestie. What guys? As she's asking, they come around the corner again. Me whispering, them. We both remain quiet until they pass. Now that we're together, they slow down when passing our table. This makes me think that either she's their intended target, or they just think now that we're together, we'll be distracted. I try not to alarm her, but I've seen these guys hanging around other stores we've been in that day. She watches them go and is quiet for a moment. Bestie, don't overthink it, Loopy. Maybe they're just mall walkers. Me? Maybe? She tries to cheer me up by talking about the movie we plan to see, and how she's happy we can get into a dine-in theater. I know this is her way of trying to protect me by distracting me, but while she's double-checking showtimes, all I can think of is how my mom told me to use an umbrella as a weapon. I tried to smile and brush things off for both our sakes, but while she's checking showtimes, guess who comes back around the corner? She's nose deep in her phone, so I turn my upper body towards them, scowling and making sure I look each of them in the eye as they walk by. I had my phone in my hands and got the sudden idea to hold it up like I was taking pictures or video. The guys sped up a bit, and White Shirt looked back at me as they went by. I watched until they were out of sight, and we didn't see them again for the rest of the night. The mood improved, we had fun, but I broke down about it to my mom later. She assured me that I did the best I could in that situation. But that night, we came up with a danger code in case I was ever snatched from somewhere. So, creepy mall walkers who I'm not convinced were just mall walkers, let's not meet. And if you touch my best friend, you'll have to kill me before I kill you. I've never wanted to talk to anyone about this because I'm sure we'll see in the comments a lot of people won't believe me. I'll be honest, it sounds like a fucking creepypasta, so I've had no desire. Recently, though, I felt comfortable enough to tell my partner, reluctantly anyways. I want to go ahead and put on record I'm really skeptical of anything paranormal or supernatural. I generally find the topic kind of cringy and corny. But I saw something as a kid. I was fortunate enough that I only saw it once. It's a memory that I try to keep out, but despite my efforts, I think about it every day. When I was about 11, I went swimming at a friend's house. It was in the summer, and at the time I lived in a pretty rural podunk town an hour or two out of the Smoky Mountains. I grew up only having a few close friends. My parents were very traditionally raised by Eastern European immigrants, so they were more strict on me in turn. I didn't particularly like the girl they were making me play with, but they knew her parents, so she was the only one I was ever allowed to hang out with. Though she got me in trouble constantly and had a fibbing issue, she had grown on me, and we loved each other as cousins would. Their house was pretty nice. It was a farmhouse that sat in the middle of probably close to 30 acres. It was surrounded by cow pastures and mostly empty fields, but the acre or two surrounding their house was kind of densely wooded. Sometimes we would play in the woods, but I'd get a really scary feeling that someone was watching us. She would agree, and we'd ride her four-wheeler home. It's hard to tell whether she actually felt that way or not because of her problem with lying. Her family had a big pool, which is where we would spend our summer. And on this day, we were getting along pretty well, and I did my best to have good fun as children do. I remember this moment distinctly. We were playing a game of sorts where we would take turns making a whirlpool for the other person to float in. Whoever made the fastest one was rewarded, and I don't remember how. It had to be my turn to make a whirlpool, and my cousin was behind me in a floaty as I swam laps around the pool to make the whirlpool faster. I was swimming underwater, thinking it would work better to make the water flow faster. That's when I saw it, or him. I lifted my head out of the water for a second, and he was standing there, at least 5 feet from the pool's ledge on the opposite side of the pool from me. It was not a person, or not like anyone I'd ever seen. I remember feeling myself becoming very dreadful and audibly gasping and flinching away, not being able to make any other noise or sound. This man was watching me. Please bear with me, because this is going to sound fucking ridiculous. In the split second I saw him, this is the description I got of him. He was skinny, but not skinnier than humanly possible. Probably 5'8". I could tell he was a grown man. Gray skin, no face, 2 hollow black eyes that took up most of his face. Not long eyes, though. They were round. That was the only definition I could see on him. The depth of his eyes and how sunken in they were. Dark, very clean-cut hair, white clothing. He had his hand up and was waving at me very calmly. The moment I turned my head, he was gone. I remember darting my head around back where he was, but nothing, and I reluctantly told my cousin I thought I saw something. She told me I was just trying to scare her, and I wasn't. She threatened to tell her mom if I did it again, so I never spoke of it again. I always thought that with age I would wisen up and figure out what the fuck that was. I haven't. In fact, this was 12 years ago. It scares me now more than it did then. This isn't what people say of ghosts. Aren't they supposed to be grotesque and have long hair and inhumanely long limbs? A few years back, I mustered up the courage to spend a while Googling what I saw, to find similar stories or something. It was grim. It took me to a lot of accounts of children seeing what I saw, and as adults they were trying to make sense of it, as I am. It was somehow linked to that black-eyed children urban legend, which I never thought could ever be true. That had to be a crock of shit. It's completely unverifiable, but I know what I saw. All I have is this, detailing my account after all these years. I lived in Seattle for a few years when I was a teenager. My dad moved us to Seattle after his brother died in a car accident. My uncle left behind his widow, 6 kids, and his business that consisted of a tavern. His widow needed help running the business, so my dad agreed to go manage it for her. The tavern was a family-run business. My father managed it, and other family members worked it as bartenders, waiters, cleaning crew, etc. The tavern was open until 1:30 in the morning, 7 days a week, and my dad was there almost every night. The tavern was very popular in the Latino community, and on the weekends it had live music, so there was a cover charge to get in. One particular weekend, my dad decided to come home early. He was just so exhausted. He called it a night and came home around 11. Around 1 in the morning, I woke up for no apparent reason. Maybe 2 minutes later, the phone started ringing. This was a time before cell phones, so one of the 2 phones was always in my room. I remember sitting up and reaching for the phone that was on my nightstand when I told myself, I don't want to be the one told Ricky's dead. Ricky was my 23-year-old cousin that worked as security in the tavern. The phone rang for a while, and my parents never used to pick up the phone because 9 out of 10 times it was for me. My dad finally got tired of hearing it ring, so he went to the living room to answer. A few seconds later, I heard my dad yelling on the phone. He seemed very angry at someone, and I obviously couldn't hear the person on the other side, but I was thinking, Dad's angry because they killed Ricky, and he wasn't there to help him. I knew he had been shot in the back by a drunk customer, and I just knew that he was dead. Ricky had been called to the door because there was a customer that was upset he wasn't allowed in. Ricky explained to him that he had already had too much to drink and to come back another time. The guy did leave, but he came back an hour later with a gun, and he shot my cousin 4 times in the back. I never told anyone that I knew Ricky was dead before my dad even picked up the phone. It's a very sensitive subject in my family, and I certainly wouldn't bring it up now. I remember my aunt, Ricky's mom, was told that he died instantly, and somehow I knew that that wasn't true. I had a feeling that he knew what was happening and was really scared. I've kept this to myself for many years, and I've always wondered how and why I knew this. In another instance, when my mother lived in her house in Mexico, she was good friends with one of her neighbors. The neighbor was a single mom with twin daughters and 1 son. The kids were really nice and always ran errands for my mom and constantly checked up on her. I remember that over the years when I would visit my mother, which was almost every weekend, I would sometimes see those kids running around the neighborhood, and they would always greet us with a smile and wave. One weekend, before heading to my mom's house, I stopped at a local casino and was playing the slots when I looked up and I saw the neighbor's son looking at me. So I smiled at him, and instead of smiling back, he quickly looked away. I thought it was weird because he was always so friendly. And then I thought maybe he wasn't supposed to be there. I mean, the legal gambling age in Mexico is 18, and he looked like he wasn't a day older. After a few minutes, I looked up again, and this time he was sitting by a slot machine. I remember he was sitting sideways and spinning his little chair a little. I noticed he didn't seem to be playing, and I thought maybe he was waiting on someone. He seemed to be looking out into the rows of the machines. I forgot about him for a while, and when I remembered, I looked up, and he was gone. I just thought it was weird he didn't greet me, even though it seemed like he recognized me. That night, after a little bit of gambling, I headed over to my mom's house to spend the rest of the weekend. After talking to my mom for a while that night, she told me that she had gone to a funeral 2 days before. The neighbor's son had been killed. He was having lunch with friends, and 2 gunmen went into the restaurant and started shooting. The neighbor's son got shot in the head and died instantly. I told my mom that that was impossible. I had just seen him a few hours ago. It was not someone that looked like him. I mean, it was him. I was planning on telling my mom I saw him that night, but she beat me to it and told me that he had died the week before. I don't know why I saw him. I mean, we weren't close, and he also didn't seem to want me to relay any kind of message. He was just there. My last instance. About 10 years ago, I was having a meeting with my supervisor, and she excused herself to take a personal phone call. She seemed to be arguing with someone and told the person that they could talk later. She apologized for the interruption and explained to me that her mom was giving her drama about feeling sick and had driven herself to the hospital. She said that her mom would often tell her that she was sick, but the doctors would always tell her it was just to get attention. It always turned out that she was fine. During the rest of our meeting, I could not get the feeling that her mom really wasn't okay out of my head. I told myself to stop because I said to myself, her mom's gonna die. I had never met her mom, but something told me that my supervisor was going to be sorry she didn't accompany her mom to the hospital that day. After our meeting, I went out to lunch, and when I got back, I was told that my supervisor had a family emergency, and she had to leave, and they didn't think she was coming back. That's when I knew for sure. I mean, I was 100% positive that her mom had passed away. As you've already guessed, her mom died that day in the hospital. It was shocking to her family because the lady was only 60 years old, and she was told she was very healthy. All the time she made drama over being sick, it was for unrelated symptoms, a headache, stomachache, back pain, etc. My supervisor took her mom's death especially hard because she felt guilty for not believing that she was sick and then letting her drive herself to the hospital. I knew her mom was not mad at her and didn't want her to feel guilty. Her mom felt bad that she had fought with her that last time they spoke. Of course, I never told her this because I have no way of knowing. I just do. Please don't think that I'm crazy or making any of this up. I know this story is really out there, and that's why I've never told anyone about this. But I am hoping that there are other people out there that have had something like this happen to them. I live in New York, about 45 minutes to an hour north of New York City. No, we don't have skyscrapers up this way. But we have lots of greenery, apple orchards, pumpkin patches, the home of Seabiscuit and George Washington's first headquarters. We're rich in history, farmers, and slums up this way. I was raised in a slum ghetto up here, about 10 minutes away from the nearest farm. Can you guess which city? Probably not, but I'll give you an obvious hint. Can you say O.C. Choppers? So, anyway, my first experience was back in 2006, I think. I can't really recall the specific year. My family home had a fire, and we had to move back down to Rockland County. I think I was 15 or 16, maybe. My mother, brother, and I were on our way back to the old home in Haverstraw from a family gathering in the Bronx. My grandpa had died the same day of the fire or the day before. So, on the way back from the gathering, something was said that ticked my mother off, and she pulled into a gas station, clicked off my seatbelt, reached over me and told me, "Get the fuck out of my car and walk home." In tears at dusk, I get out of her car, and I'm so upset at this point, but there's nothing I can do but abide by her wishes. So, here are a few small details. That gas station? It's the one of two in an intersection that is easily 6 miles away from Haverstraw. Number 2, the way home? 6 miles, maybe more, on a dark, windy 2-lane highway, which was so dark I had to use my Nokia cell phone to see where I was going. Number 3, I was wearing a denim miniskirt, short-sleeve top, and some Air Forces. Perfect victim wear. 4, my mother and I have a tumultuous relationship, and that day it was really bad. I'm still currently estranged from her. Like I'll never allow her back in my life type of relationship. Back to abiding by my ever-so-wise mother's wish. I get out, begging her not to leave me, but I begin to walk as she peels away. A lady smoking a cigarette by her car says, "Hey, sweetheart, you okay?" Me, "I'll be okay. Can I have one of those?" The lady looked at me, asked my age, and then said, "Never mind. A mom wouldn't let a baby walk home dressed like that." I knew what she was passively asking, but I was not going to offer her my age when I desperately was in need of a cigarette at this point. I also knew I wasn't dressed inappropriately. I mean, yeah, it was a mini skirt, but it was hot as balls that day, except now post-dusk and it was really effing dark and getting cold up in the mountains. The lady gave me 2 cigarettes and her lighter and said, "God bless." And at the time in my mind I'm thinking, fuck a bless, give me a ride. So I said thank you and was on my merry way. I lit the first smoke and started walking. As I'm walking towards Haverstraw, I'm making observations I've never noticed before. Like, wow, this road is insanely dark. Why aren't there any lamppost lights? I'm talking, I can't see my hand in front of my face dark. So I pull out my Nokia and light my way, making sure I stay near the guardrail and off the road so nobody hits me. But if you're familiar with this area, then you know I can't walk off the road on either side of the rail because it has a ditch running alongside them. I stop, clip a cigarette, and proceed to walk. I'd stopped crying at this point and was actually starting to sing. I'm talking really singing because it was dark. I was alone, and I was not into the thought of possibly getting run over by a deer and getting mauled by a bear or being prey to a wolf. Yeah. So, go me. My song was Make It Through the Rain by Mariah Carey. I'm at the end of the song when I start smelling this nasty, pungent aroma that had me gagging. It was so gross. And then I had this thought that made me pray, oh, please don't let it be a dead girl. My imagination went wild, all the thoughts of finding a person on the side of the road, and the length of time it took me to find what had me traumatizing myself with all these what-ifs. I started to curse my mom with every swear in my mental archive. It was, of course, a deer, but oh my God, was it gross. So I lit that cigarette back up to mask the smell of decomposition. At this point, no car has passed me at all. I'd been walking for 25 minutes or more, and not even dear old Mummy circled back for her young. My mind started to become paranoid. Mind you, this was the only way for me to get home. This road. No shortcut, just straight through. And what if I'm in danger? What if somebody is lurking beyond the trees? If somebody wanted me, they could get me. I'm a perfect victim, and I could end up on the side of the road like that deer. Deadass. It was like meant to be for my thoughts to be that way, because all of a sudden, a truck pulled up next to me. The cabin light was turned on, and it was a red pickup truck with a 2-seat cabin. I can clearly see across to this old man. I can also see somewhat in the flatbed. Now, when I say old man, remember, I'm 16 at the time, and old is much older than 16. He had salt and pepper hair, these beautiful eyes, a stepdad look to him, and a strong build to his shoulders. Need a ride? Never talk to strangers, right? No, thank you. I appreciate the offer. What's a pretty little thing like you doing out here in the dark? You're a little too young to be out at this time, don't you think? Yeah, he called me pretty. I've seen this on Lifetime before. I'm dead. Yeah, you're right, but my house is a couple of driveways down. Nice call. There are homes on the bottom of the mountain. You can run for it if you need to, but you have no clue how far the next driveway is, and you're on the wrong side of the road, genius. He looked at me and said, "Come on, I'll drive you to your house. You're on the wrong side of the road anyways." I about died when he said that. I was wondering all the time this was going down if I was speaking my thoughts out loud, and his face showed he was going to be persistent in persuading me to hop in his truck. Needless to say, that clip burned out, so I lit the second cigarette while taking a good long look at his face and build. I couldn't see the model or make of the vehicle because he was literally hugging me to the rail. Any more and I would have been pinned. This is when I also peeked into the bed of his pickup. Side note, this may be brazen, but at this point my NYPD uncle's words came to me about us meaning his nieces, being in situations like this. 1, always know your captor's description. 2, what kind of vehicle is he driving, if he's driving? 3, if you're taken, fight like hell and take some DNA with you. 4, don't quit. Quitting is death. Be smart about your next move. He had had one too many when he told me this, but I still carry these words around. So I take a deep inhale of my cigarette, knowing it's going to be my last, and I give him an angelic smile. I blow the smoke in his face and say as convincingly as possible while looking in his eyes, "Look, I want to thank you so much for your help, but I'm really close to home, and my boyfriend will be coming down this road any minute to meet me there. You're kind of holding me up from my curfew, too. My parents are going to be pissed as shit." His eyes got dark. Telling the story right now is really creeping me out, because it's as if I'm there on that dark road again. He says, "Yeah, okay," and pulls off. No cars yet except him, and while this whole thing is happening, I'm praying, wishing, hoping for a car, preferably a state trooper, to pass by and see this guy idling. So I'm watching him pull away and quickly glancing again into his truck bed for unwanted people. I glanced at my cig and noticed it went out, so I lit it up again, cupping the flame. I look up, and the bastard has stopped almost 50 feet away. So now I'm in full panic mode. I start walking super slow and start planning to cross the road and run down the mountainside to the nearest house with lights. But what about spiders? Oh, fuck spiders. This is your life, kid. Get it together. I'm counting my steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. Run on 10, girl. You will survive tonight. 5, 6. Another car pulls up to me. The window rolls down, and this gorgeously delicious-looking man looks at me and says in a stern voice, "Get in, now." He didn't have to tell me twice. I flick my cigarette, get in the car, and he reaches over and clicks my seatbelt. This is insane, I think to myself. This guy could be the real kidnapper. He could be my killer, and now I'm fucked. He peels off and flips off the guy in the truck, and he says to me, "How old are you? You shouldn't be out here at this time, and you shouldn't talk to strangers." I said, "Ditto. So are you going to kill me? Tell me the truth, please, because I just want to prepare myself." "No, I'm your knight in shining armor, love." "That guy in the pickup?" "A girl just jumped out of the bed of his flatbed at the gas station a couple miles back saying she needed help and to call 911 because she'd been kidnapped." I was immediately nauseous and began to see black spots behind my eyelids. He must have sensed my inner turmoil because he grabbed my hand and said, "I was at the counter when all this happened. I overheard a lady telling 911 that there was a young lady walking all alone down the road, and he peeled out of the parking lot going towards Haverstraw. I flew down this road to find you, and I'm glad I did, or you could have been his victim. Now, where can I drop you off?" I should have got his name, number, and then married him, but I will never forget that man who saved my life. About 10 years ago, I was working as a waitress at a local diner and living in a low-income apartment. The apartments were brand new and beautiful. To this day, it was the nicest apartment inside that I've ever lived in. I lived on the 3rd floor, and outside it looked nice as well. The landscaping was kept up, and they had these tall and thick, pretty flowering hedges that wrapped around the building. But due to some drug activity, it wasn't always the safest, and it was normal to see needles, burned and bent-up spoons, condoms, and all that kind of stuff. We also lived right on a river, close to a downtown area. Less than a mile away, there were some homeless shelters and a place called the Daily Bread, where anyone in need could go for a meal. So it wasn't unusual to see homeless people on the road outside my apartment complex, or sleeping on benches by the playground. They never bothered me, though. I usually worked mornings at my job, but every once in a while, I would fill in for someone on the swing shift, 4 to 11. I usually kept my tips in my apron for a few days and then deposited the money on my way home. This particular Sunday, our busiest day, I had worked the morning shift and had done really well. So when I heard they were short-handed for swing shift, I volunteered to work a double. I ended up doing really well on that shift as well. Clocked out at 9:30 with about $250 in my apron. I stopped at my bank to make a deposit through the ATM and got home around 10:15. So I pull up and I see that I have a spot fairly close to the stairwell. It's dark, but I can see that there's no one else around. I park and walk past the hedge and turn right to go up the stairs. When out of the corner of my eye, I can see a man between the hedge and the building. I look to the right and I can see that he is smoking a cigarette, wearing jeans and a black shirt, and he's covered in paint, like he was a house painter. He looked like he was on drugs, wide-eyed and a little crazed. He saw me look at him. I felt creeped out because I had not seen him from my car, and I was wondering why he was standing out of the light and hiding behind the hedge. So I start to take the stairs 2 at a time. I get to the top of the first flight of stairs when I hear someone following me. I look back, and it was the man. We made eye contact, and he was already halfway up the stairs and running at me. I start running too and freaking out internally, because even if I beat him upstairs, I still need to unlock my door. My roommate and I usually keep it locked, and I just kept running as fast as I could. When I got to the top of the second flight, he was like 4 steps behind me. I ran harder and debated screaming for help. I get to the top of the third flight, and I'm still 15 feet from my door, and he's almost on me. I can hear him breathing hard. His eyes were bulging. His arms were outstretched to grab me. He was a foot away from me, and my apartment was still 10 feet away. I inhale and open my mouth to scream as loud as I can for help, when my 6'4", buff-as-F construction worker neighbor opens his apartment door to come out for a smoke. I let out a scream that started in horror, but trailed off in relief as my neighbor saw what was happening and started running to me. The man turned right around and sprinted off, and my neighbor chased him to the second floor, and then ran back up and yelled for his girlfriend to call the cops. At this point, I'm a hyperventilating, crying, and shaking puddle on the ground. My neighbor comforts me and gets my best friend and roommate to come help me. I thought that man was going to catch me and hurt me. And looking back, it's more likely that he was trying to rob me because I was still wearing my work apron and it was late. We made a police report where the cop told us that a day labor company for the homeless had a painting contract that they were currently working. Cops made a point to start doing more drives through our complex, and my roommate and I bought mace and started calling each other to come watch the other person come upstairs if it was dark at night when we got home. So, to the man covered in paint and hiding in my hedges, let's never meet again. Never, ever. This is a story with a happy ending, I promise. It's a recount of some unsettling events I went through during my college years, as well as the most amazing example of the bro sixth sense I have ever witnessed. So, without further ado, meet Kevin. Kevin was a colleague of mine and was in the same group as me, which meant we had maybe 5 or 6 subjects per year together. Kevin was odd. Not that there was anything wrong with him, physically. He was adorable. A bit nerdy, a bit on the shorter, scrawny side with blonde hair, big blue eyes, and like 3 fluffy hairs on his chin instead of facial hair. If I had to compare him to something, I'd say he looked like a cute, soft baby chicken. If baby chickens were mentally inclined to grow into serial killers. More on that later. At first, I didn't really notice him. There were a lot of people in my class. Everything was new, and I personally did not know anyone, except for a guy named Harper, whom I knew from my sports days, as we often competed against each other. exchange colorful insults on the track, and then go get drinks together. Harper will be important later on. As I've said, I only knew Harper there, and there were only 6 other girls in my class, as I've attended classes that held little interest among the female college population. During that time, I made friends and got real chummy with 3 more geeky guys: Zachary, whom I even casually dated for a short time; Steve, we realized our mothers went to college together too, which equaled instant friendship; and Rick, with whom I shared many interests. So, to count it down, important guys so far: Harper, former sports competition adversary; Zachary, casually went out for a bit; Steve, chill guy, insta friend; Rick, nerd to end all nerds, but a well of interesting trivia, awesome guy. These are important. These would later become my personal army. And then, there was Kevin. Damn cute Kevin, whom I made the mistake of asking if he had any notes picked up from the first half of a lecture I missed because I overslept. In Kevin speak, "Hey, you got the notes from this morning?" apparently translated into, "I have interest in you, oh magnificent Kevin. Nothing would make me happier than knowing I have caught your eye, so please, make sure I am never left without your presence again, for I cannot bear it." I borrowed his notes, partially copied them, and returned his notebook back. What I didn't see was that Kevin then sniffed the notebook when I had my back turned. Zachary noticed it first, and snort laughed about it later, because my first reaction to it when he told me was to sniff myself and see if I stank or something. I was young and naive then, so the sniffing was less what's wrong with him and more what's wrong with me. And that's where it all went downhill. Over the next few weeks, Kevin would always be there, never talking to anyone precisely, just kind of staring at me when we were in class, when we had breaks and went out for coffee to the shop outside. Then he started showing up for classes we did not attend together, and said he simply arrived too early for his later classes. He never participated. He just sat there in the back. Also, Kevin had sort of an aura about him. Like, you didn't have to look at the door to know when he entered the room. You just felt the eyes in the back of your head and kind of wished for a shower. Anyway, I didn't worry too much, until one day I went to the women's bathroom during a break. I did my business, went to the front section to wash my hands, and in came Kevin. I was alone. Kevin turned, closed the door behind him, and locked it. Needless to say, I was confused and unsure of what to do, so I just stared at him and asked if he needed something. "Hi," he said, then proceeded with, "How are you?" Like he hadn't just locked himself in the women's bathroom with me for no fathomable reason. I realized something was very, very wrong and attempted not to panic, managing to keep a nonchalant expression and turn towards the mirror so I could still see him and pretend to fix my makeup. "Fine," I said, and spoke no more. I could see Kevin fidgeting, playing with the key nervously, and after a long and uncomfortable silence, an eternity really, I heard loud banging from the other side of the door. It was Harper and Steve. Harper yelled something like, "Kevin, get your scrawny ass over here and open that door, or I swear to God, in the next 10 seconds, the door ain't going to be the only thing I'm breaking." I could hear Steve behind him, sounding a bit panicked, telling him to move since he managed to get the spare key. Kevin paled and stepped away, the key he had falling somewhere to the floor. Steve and Harper unlocked the door, and Harper jumped on Kevin like a damn primate and knocked him to the floor, while Steve and Rick, who was there as well, got inside and all but dragged me out of the bathroom area. None of them wanted to tell me what or why or how any of that happened, but I pushed at the weakest link, Rick, when we were alone, and found out that a whole hour prior to all of that, Rick overheard Kevin asking one of the on-campus students, the guys who get some extra cash if they help with paperwork, fixing and cleaning the campus, for the ladies' bathroom key, and paying him for it. Rick didn't know why the hell Kevin would need that key, but knew that Kevin was a weirdo, so we figured it couldn't be good. Later on, Steve was looking for me and asked Rick if he had seen me, and stuff kind of clicked for Rick. They asked around, and people told them they saw me go to the bathroom area, and I didn't come out yet. More confirmed that they saw Kevin going there too, and joked that we must have had a makeout session. Steve immediately connected the dots. Harper overheard him talking to Rick, and they went to break me free from Kevin's affections, while Steve ran to get the extra key from the janitor. Kevin appeared with a lightly black eye in class 2 days later, just wishing to forget the whole thing. I pretended he did not exist. I wish this was the end of it. Maybe a week or two went by. I figured he learned his lesson. He's leaving me alone. But then he got the wind in his sails back for some reason, and proceeded with attempting to sit next to me in class. He was so insistent that Zachary got involved, and now the guys, Harper, Zachary, Steve, and Rick, made a timetable so 2 and 2 would attend classes at all times when I was there, so each could sit on either side of me. I never asked any of this of them. They insisted. After a few failed attempts, Kevin gave up and settled for sitting in the back, glaring at my back and the other 2 guys on duty that day. I wish this was the end of it. 2 weeks later, Kevin didn't show up for class, or left early. I hoped he'd found some other interests and that it was finally over. Hell no. I noticed Kevin was now following me to the bus station. It took just one time to see him standing inconspicuously behind the newspaper stand to freak out and call Steve, as he lived nearby. Steve picked me up and drove me home. The next morning, Harper called me around 9 and went, "Are you in my class at 10 today?" Yeah. Right, pack your shit and wait for me at the end of your street. Kevin is waiting for you at the bus station. Steve just called me. This went on for some 5 days, as the guys extended their bro services to now accompanying me literally at all times, before, during, and after class. Just to point out yet again, I'm eternally grateful for it. These 4 dude bros of mine were like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. All business and vengeance, and it was amazing, and probably saved me from a lot more problems with cute Kevin. That day, Kevin showed up to class looking somewhat roughed up, but now stared at me with so much hate I could barely cope, and finally, after some sound advice from Harper and Rick, decided to bring this shit to college authorities. The pro dean immediately transferred Kevin to a completely different group, so our classes never overlapped again. I stopped seeing Kevin all the time and reached my final year in college. By now, Zachary and Steve moved away. Harper finished it early and no longer attended classes, so it was only me and Rick now, but it was okay since Kevin was no longer there. I wish this was the end of it. Rick and I finished college, graduated, and decided to celebrate by visiting a medieval fair in Rick's hometown that summer. We agreed to get some drinks for old time's sake. All was well. We had a great time as we toured the fair a bit. And suddenly, Rick, the sweet, polite Rick, goes, "Son of a bitch. Ain't that fucking Kevin?" 'Twas fucking Kevin. Goddamn cute Kevin is there, staring at us, then turns on his heel and leaves. We saw him a few more times. I started to panic, thinking he was following me again. So Rick was already dialing a few of his friends to come over. But Kevin suddenly got lost, and I never ever saw him again. Carry on, Kevin, you creepy little chicken. Hope you learned to function in society by now. Almost a year ago, I took a job as night security for one of the buildings that houses several offices. Pay is not really much, but the proximity of the location from my house is what I really like. I usually just leave my car at home and take a 2-mile walk to and from work. I've always prided myself in being fit, so this was a great excuse for taking a brisk night walk. My shift doesn't start until 11 p.m., but I am often in the office an hour early. I'd clock in at 10, make my first cup of coffee for the night, and then chat a bit with the other security personnel. My schedule is pretty predictable, and one can tell what time it is just by knowing where I'd be. The building I'm assigned to is about 5 floors high with basement parking. Several offices are housed in this building, with one of them also operating a night shift. There are no more than 15 people in this particular office, and they spend most of their time inside. I have very little to no interaction with these people, except on a few occasions where my help was needed. I started my round promptly at 11, and with a flashlight and my radio in hand, I'd make my way down to the basement parking lot and move 1 floor at a time, terminating on the building's roof deck. I usually stayed there the longest, as I liked the cool breeze and the quietness of the place. More often than not, the roof deck is pitch dark and only illuminated by the surrounding buildings. I've heard several stories from the other security personnel about some strange goings-on in this building. I didn't really pay much attention to them, as they seemed to be rather exaggerated. Case in point, the story of a boy who apparently had a knack for suddenly showing himself half-bodied to the night security and employees. Seeing a half-bodied boy will surely freak anyone out, but in my 10 months there, I'd have yet to encounter him. There are stories as well of whispering and disembodied voices, and again, I have yet to hear these. Things changed, however, just recently. No, I haven't encountered the half-bodied boy, nor have I heard the disembodied voices, yet the experience I had left me wondering just what the heck I was seeing, and to be honest, I'm still not too sure. The first instance took place towards the end of February this year, February 24th to be exact. It was a Sunday. There are 3 of us on night shift, with one taking the weekends off. This time, however, the other security guy called in sick, leaving me the only personnel there. There's not much to do on weekends anyway, as the only office that has a night operation is also closed. I did my usual round, ending up on the 4th floor a little after 1 in the morning. As I walked from one end of the building towards the other, I saw someone enter one of the small offices. I didn't receive a memo from the building administrator indicating someone was coming in that night. Was a break-in happening on my watch? I couldn't let that happen. I went back to the security office, took our service pistol, and cautiously approached the said office. I checked the door, and it was secure. No sign of forced entry. I shone the light inside. Nothing was amiss, and definitely no one was inside. Baffled, I went back to the security room and ran the closed-circuit cameras. There was indeed someone, but the strange thing was, the figure just passed through the solid glass door. Even with the grainy quality of the footage as I zoomed in, it was clear that someone passed through the door. That someone was like a solid dark mass with no discernible features, other than what seemed like a small head on a rather large torso. I was reluctant to file an incident report given the circumstances, so I left it at that. I didn't even mention this to the other security personnel. A few weeks passed without any further incident, until about 2 weeks ago. As I was doing my usual rounds, I got a call from the other security. He told me that someone was at the door of one of the offices, the same office where I had my strange encounter. He asked me if I could go and check it out, and as I got there, I radioed back and told the other security that there was no one there. He insisted that there was, and that he could clearly see the other on the monitor. I was so annoyed at the thought of this dude pulling my leg, so I went back to the security room to get him to level with me. When I got there, he showed me the recording. There really was someone in front of the office door, just inches away from me. The same solid mass with a very small head and large torso. The funny thing is, in that footage, I seemed to be talking to whatever was there. The other security did not see it as an apparition, and to this day, he still thinks it was a real person I was talking to, and that I was the one pulling his leg. Well, what the heck did I see? Growing up, I never thought much of ghosts or, in general, the paranormal. As a child, there were a few occasions, but I never thought of it much until years later when I met my old best friend in high school. Let's call this old best friend Kay. Kay was very attuned with the paranormal. She would always tell me stories where she would hear tapping or scratching on the walls, voices sometimes distorted, or see figures, orbs, and mists in the hallway. It was not rare for her to accidentally interact with ghosts either, where in public places she would be approached and would hold conversations, only for strangers to give her weird looks because it seemed she was talking to herself. She would often have to visit her temple to be blessed. She's Buddhist, and she would wear white string on her wrists and ankles to school. I'll admit, I was never completely convinced with her stories, or in fact that ghosts were real until later incidents. Kay and I were still in high school at the time, and we were sitting in class at a table towards the back of the room. The table we sat next to was beside a window, and the walls of the class were entirely white. We were mindlessly chatting until I realized Kay was not looking at me when we were talking, but behind me. She looked scared and looked frozen. From the corner of my eye, there was a black mass that suddenly vanished the moment I turned my head to see what she was staring at. I was shocked because I was sure I saw something black hovering over my shoulder from the corner of my eye, only to later confirm with her that a black shadow was right behind me as we were talking. I was a little unnerved. However, I simply assumed if something was there, it was there because of her attraction to spirits rather than mine. However, more incidents occurred where I became more of a believer. Once again, Kay and I were sitting at a table. However, in this scenario, we were on a school field trip based on building leadership skills. It was lunchtime, and we were eating at another school's dining area, which was basically their own restaurant kitchen designated for culinary students, thus explaining the fancy tablecloths over the tables. At the table, Kay and I sat with a mentor who was discussing our goals for the future. I gazed over our mentor's shoulder and caught a corner of a tablecloth from another table lift in midair, as if something was holding it. There was 1, no one there at the table, and 2, absolutely no wind that day. It also seemed I was not the only person confused, as Kay was also staring at the corner of the tablecloth being held up. The moment our mentor turned her head to see what we were staring at, it dropped, leaving Kay and I baffled. I came to the conclusion these experiences were more likely to happen simply because I was with Kay. However, I figured out that's not really the case. I soon started to experience minor things at home that would leave me a bit spooked. In the kitchen, I would walk in and see cooking utensils that were placed in the sink fall onto the floor, despite being placed in the sink. No one else was in the kitchen. Windows were shut, and it would be impossible for wind to somehow move a wooden spoon from sink onto the floor. Once, I was showering and left a cabinet drawer open, only for it to close while I was in the shower. Note that these drawers were not flimsy, and it is impossible for any form of wind to close them. Additionally, the bathroom window was shut. These were only minor experiences, and I often doubted, thinking maybe I was just taking things out of context and exaggerating. In late 2016, several occurrences happened. I was sick from a case of gastro and had been vomiting until the early hours of the morning. I soon fell asleep around 3 a.m., only to wake up around 7 a.m., my usual waking up time, to see what appeared to be smoke. I shot up from my bed thinking that something had caught on fire since it was right near the power switch on the wall. Assuming my eyes were blurry due to the fact that I had just woken up, I rubbed my eyes, and it was still there. It looked like a thick white mist, and it slowly dissipated as I leaned closer. I felt calm and did not think of it as harmful or demonic. It was just in the corner of my room. It was not largely dispersed or anything. It was just basically in one particular spot. Later in the year, my older sister went to study abroad, so I moved into her room. Because I was often home alone, My old room made me incredibly uncomfortable, and I became a little paranoid. I lived in a house where anything and everything echoed. A door closing from one end of the house could be heard from the opposite end. I had been moving things from my old room to my sister's, and had left my laptop in my old room on the floor as I had just cleared out a majority of my things. I was in my sister's room when suddenly I heard music playing. It was a song I often listened to, so I walked back into my old room and found my laptop on YouTube playing that song. It sounds normal, but this laptop is a MacBook and was only a few months old. It was in top condition, and I often cleared the history browser out of habit. Checking the browser, it was completely clear the way that I had left it, with the only other website used being the Google default page, the page it was on before I left the room. Nothing had been searched, even on YouTube. There was no way it could have landed on another site, since I never bookmarked pages. Another problem with my laptop happened when my mom was home with me. My sister had just arrived in Canada, and there were problems with her luggage, so my mom forced me to submit a lost luggage form online. I completed a form with my sister's travel details, but my sister messaged and said not to worry about it, so I refreshed the page, losing the information I had filled out. My mother then argued and said I should have submitted it anyway, so she came and sat beside me as we went to fill out a new form. I scrolled to the bottom of the form we had not filled out, and my mother soon pointed at my screen and laughed, where the address section was answered with "dummy." I was confused and weirded out. I had not touched the laptop, nor had my mom. She had actually asked if I wrote it, and has no clue how to work technology. As for this one, I'm unsure if it was just a dream. It's kind of hard to explain, but when I dream, there is never light. I can distinguish the setting, colors, time, day or night in my dreams, yet they always lack the authenticity of light or darkness. My dreams are also never completely realistic, and I'm always conscious that it is a dream. I could also see what was happening from my eyes, where when I dream it is as if I am a bystander. But anyway, back to the dream. I recall waking up one morning, my eyes opening slightly, when a woman walked into my room. My eyes were not completely open, so I couldn't recall her face. However, I knew she was fair-skinned and in a blue patterned dress. She spoke to me, commenting that I had moved into my sister's room, kissing me on the forehead in a motherly fashion. Her voice sounded similar to my mother, and I was fairly disoriented from being woken up, so I had assumed that she had come home and checked up on me. I just closed my eyes and went back to sleep. Back to what I know is reality. A few hours had passed, and I had woken up again. I went into the living room, expecting to see my mother, as I assumed she was home, only to see that I was home alone. I even checked the garage, and her car was not there. I soon took another nap in the afternoon, and woke up to my mom coming into my room and checking on me. It was eerily similar, yet dissimilar. My mother kissed me on the cheek, commented that I had moved rooms, yet her words lacked the same warmth. Other incidents include a friend's birthday party, where a few of us were messing around in the garage. The garage door was left open, so we were exposed to the street, and there was a large mirror on the wall. Me and one friend were busy taking photos in the mirror, while my other 3 friends were chilling outside of the garage on the street. I remember looking into the mirror and seeing something flash by the others who were playing around in the street. It was incredibly fast and blinding white. I had no idea what it was. The street was completely quiet. There were no cars, and it was definitely too fast to have been a car. I turned to my other 3 friends on the street, one of whom had the same confused look that I did. I asked her if she saw that too, and she told me that she saw a girl in a white dress run past the garage. These events don't happen often. They usually occur once every few months, and I'm not bothered by it, since paranormal events interest me in all honesty, and these odd things that occur to me aren't alarming or dangerous, at least not in comparison to my friends. In recent months, I felt a comforting hand on my shoulder, only to look in the reflection of my computer screen and see that no one is behind me. I also recently had my first occurrence of sleep paralysis, where a demonic woman crawled on the top of my body, kind of like The Grudge, but basically looked as if her body was decaying. I blame that on me watching too many horror movies, but I discussed it with my friends who said it was common when sleeping on your back or when you're stressed. They've also told me that watching movies can open you up to the attacks of the paranormal. I have heard a man's voice speak in my room upon awakening. There are no males in my household, my parents are separated. I've also seen a blue orb float down my hallway in the dark when I was home alone. Maybe it's my imagination. Perhaps it isn't. I'm not particularly concerned as I'm not bothered by it. But the only question I have is out of curiosity. Why have these things happened more as I get older, compared to when I was younger? And is it influenced by anybody around me? My senior year of high school, I started talking with this super hot emo punk kid named Brian on AIM. I was all in. I'd just been dumped by my loser high school boyfriend, and Brian was incredibly sweet and always knew what to say. There were some red flags for sure. Whenever I would finally convince him to send me a picture, he looked a little different in each photo. Like they could have been pictures of different people, but it looked similar enough and the guy liner was on point, so I just accepted it. We also never talked on the phone. I would beg him to let me call him, but he always had an excuse. Finally, the summer before I left for college, he let me call him and his voice was super fucking weird. My friend was convinced it was like a 50-year-old woman, but I was like, hell no, this is Brian. I was so blinded that I ignored every warning sign. I told him everything. He knew all of my passwords, everything about my day-to-day life. I mean, literally every single one of my friends told me he wasn't real, that I needed to stop being such a dumbass. But I honestly loved him. That fall, I left for college. My first roommate was a total windbag who had a mile-long list of rules for the room. No boys ever allowed in. I wasn't allowed to touch her Left Behind series she proudly displayed. No guests after 8 p.m., etc. So I was desperate to bounce. I found out that there was an empty room and requested a transfer for winter semester. I knew going in blind was a risk, but it couldn't be worse than Left Behind chick. At the same time, I was loving everything else about college. Things with Brian kind of waned because life was busy, and I wanted to experience everything, also known as other dudes. He would call me 20 times a day, message me all the time, constantly barrage me about whether or not I had a Facebook and wanted the password to it. Yeah, no. Finally, I broke things off for good. The next semester, I moved into my awesome new room. My roommate was a fellow freshman from Massachusetts who transferred that semester. She was loaded, brought basically everything we would both need for the room. Her mom even got us matching bedding from Pottery Barn. I mean, it was fucking awesome. She was a little weird, and like always wanted to hang out the first week, but I figured it was just nerves. The first weekend after classes started, I was chilling with some friends in the quad area, and she came over and threw her keys at me and was like, "Have fucking fun with these losers." I was like, what the hell is going on? I ended up sleeping at one of my girlfriend's rooms that night because I was super freaked out. The next day, it was like nothing happened. We hung out that whole week. She was very perceptive and helpful, and I was amped to have met what I thought would be my college bestie. The next weekend, I convinced her to come out, and we were having a blast, dancing with dudes, and then things were escalating with me and soccer jock, so I let her know I was bailing. We were a 2-minute walk from the soccer house and came with a group, so I figured, hey, no big deal. I got back to the room later that night, and I see that shit is torn the fuck up. Clothes ripped out of the closet, stuff all over the floor, and she was sitting on my bed and her arm was bleeding. I asked her what the hell was going on. She had broken my coffee cup and carved my fucking initials in her arm. I ran and got an RA because I'm not trying to get murdered. She ended up getting committed that night and her parents flew down. And this is where shit got even weirder. She was Brian. She told her parents, they told me. He decided to try to start things with me as like her true self, applied to my school and called the housing department to request me as a roommate, emailed housing from my email and requested her as my roommate, and then deleted the emails. Her parents apologized, said I could keep all of the stuff in the room, that they withdrew her from classes, and left. I got a no-contact order, and the craziest story of my life. I was walking my boyfriend's dogs a month or so ago on some trails near the beach. His dogs are both mutts. One is a husky chow other, and one is a pit bull hippo, I think. They're both sweet, loving, social, and completely chill. This particular trail leads down to an estuary that starts in a state park, but there are only 2 parking spots at the trailhead, so it's nearly always deserted when I'm there. There's basically a maintained trail that goes to the estuary, and then there's an unofficial trail that loops off the actual trail. It's hard to spot and largely overgrown, but I can tell I'm not the only one who uses it. I was walking the dogs on the main trail and just getting to the estuary when we typically stop to watch the birds for a bit. One of the dogs, the husky, started this low growl and puffed a full mohawk. We live in an area with cougar and bears, so that's the first place my mind went. I drew my pistol. I'm a redneck and a hunter, and I'm always usually carrying. I did it just in case, and started backing up the trail. I'd only taken a few steps, dragging the husky, still growling scarily, away from everything. The pit was still clueless and was watching a squirrel dopily, when a creepy motherfucker, henceforth known as CMF, stepped out from behind a tree. He wasn't scary looking, just the typical REI outdoorsy looking type that frequent the craft breweries on every corner here in Washington. He was maybe in his late 40s, early 50s, and the tree he was behind wasn't huge. He would have had to position himself deliberately to hide behind it when I was approaching. He started walking towards me, smiling at the growling and pissed-off dog like it was a bunny rabbit, and talking to him in a soothing voice, with his hand out like he was going to pet him. The dog barked loudly and continued to growl in an unfamiliar and terrifying way. At this moment, my pit finally got her act together and looked away from her new squirrel friend. She took in the scene and got in between the guy and me immediately. She didn't puff or growl. I honestly don't know if she knows how. She's such a teddy bear. But her tail was out at a weird angle, and she was baring her teeth at him. Now, I don't know if it was her threatening looks or if the CMF had a complete glimpse of my gun that I was holding down by my side, but he suddenly dropped the amiable hiker facade and gave me this look that just made my skin crawl. It was pure evil. He didn't move a step after that, and didn't say anything else. It was creepy AF. I said something along the lines of, "Don't fucking come near me," and we left quickly. This time I made sure he saw my gun as I turned around. When I got to the part of the trail that loops off, I took it after checking to see if CMF was in sight. The dogs were still super tense and on alert, and I eventually slowed down so I could listen, and also because I'm a fat ass and was about to pass out from the exertion. The loop meanders wide around the trail and is probably a quarter of a mile or so longer than the main path, which itself is maybe about a mile. When I was nearing the point that the loop hit the main trail again, my good boy started to growl again. It was super low, so thankfully the creeper didn't hear it. He was on the main trail heading back towards the estuary. As soon as he was out of sight, we booked it up the last 100 yards or so of trail to the trailhead. The Subaru I had parked next to had its hatch open. It hadn't been open when I had gotten there. I tried to see the license plate, but couldn't since it was on the hatch, and I wasn't willing to take an extra second to pull it down and look. I basically threw my pit into the back of my Jeep. She's 90 pounds with the physique of a small hippo, as previously noted, so I'm pretty proud that I was able to do that. My other dog hopped up with her. I jumped in and took off, and right when I turned onto the road, my pit barked. That is the first and only time in my 6 months of knowing her that she has ever barked. My best guess of what happened is that as soon as I was out of sight, CMF started to follow me and didn't know about the other trail. He got to the trailhead ahead of me since his trail was shorter and saw my Jeep was still there. He opened his hatch for reasons that just couldn't have been good and headed back down the path to find me. When he heard my door close, he raced back to the trailhead, where my very, very good girl told him what she thought of him. I swear, that bark sounded like the combination of all the dirtiest swear words I know, and several I don't. It was off-season, so the state park was barely manned, if at all, by rangers. As soon as I got back to the road where there is a cell signal, I called my brother, who's a cop in the town that the park borders. He wasn't on shift, and it took a while for anyone to get out there. And by the time they did, CMF was gone. CMF, you better hope we don't meet again. And if you ever attempt that bullshit with another woman, may she also have a scary dog and a full-size pistol to show you the error in your ways. My stepdogs were trying to protect me, but inadvertently protected you by giving me a way to get away without having to resort to drastic measures. With or without the dogs, you will not get away unscathed next time. So for your sake, let's not meet. I used to work third shift at a small 44-bed nursing home. We were supposed to be in an assisted living facility for people who were cognizant, yet unable to live on their own, and a rehabilitation center for those recovering from surgery or stroke. In reality, we were mainly taking care of elderly residents with Alzheimer's and dementia. Needless to say, people passed there. My duties were fairly simple. Come in, see to any residents who weren't already in bed, check the ones who were in bed, and then make rounds every 2 hours to make sure everyone was clean and still breathing. It's been almost 7 years since I worked there, so I don't remember the order in which these events happened. I'm just going to list them by order of severity. Every so often, I would come into work super tired from staying up too late, so after each of my rounds, I would set my phone alarm for an hour and a half and take a nap in one of the recliners. Next thing I knew, there was a loud whap, like someone dropping a heavy hardback book on the floor, but right next to my ear, causing me to jump up and be awake. I would look around and see that no one was there before rushing down the hall to check to see if any of my residents were okay, which they always were. After that, I'd start my rounds. This happened at least 2 times that I remember, and I always woke up about 1 to 2 minutes before my alarm was supposed to go off. The second wasn't really an event per se. It was just something that one of the residents said to me that kind of creeped me out. One night, when I put one of my residents, a sweet old lady named Mrs. Lindsay, to bed, she looked at me with a smile and said, "You have the most beautiful angel watching over you. or behind you. I can't remember exactly what she said. Mrs. Lindsay did have dementia, but she was cognizant enough to recognize people, and sometimes circumstances that happened around her, so hearing her say something like that was a little bit more than just creepy. The last one is one that still gives me chills and makes me a little paranoid just thinking about it even today. Most of the rooms were just rectangles with one bed on each end, a wardrobe at the foot of each bed for residents' clothing, and a small end table beside the bed for smaller effects and our gloves and wipes. There were windows on the wall opposite the door from the hall, and I was in the middle of one of my rounds when I entered one of the rooms to check on the residents. As I was digging through the end tables looking for gloves, I started to feel the muscles in my neck, shoulders, and back start to tense up. I felt like a weight had just settled across my shoulders, and what's more, it felt like there was something huge directly behind me. By huge, I mean it felt like there was something at least 8 feet tall. I'm 6 feet tall, but whatever this was, felt like it was standing over me, looking down on top of me. I couldn't move. I could hardly blink. All I could do was stare straight ahead at the windows. The only thing I could think was, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap. But then, as suddenly as it had started, it was gone, and I could move again. When I turned around, all that behind me was a jerry chair and a wheelchair. I don't know how long the feeling lasted, and I didn't think to check the time. It felt like an hour, but couldn't have been more than a few minutes. I don't remember if there were any sounds or anything like that, just a huge, imposing pressure right behind me. As for my policy on determining what I was thinking about beforehand, I was essentially on autopilot mode. My body was working, while my brain was basically off, so I wasn't thinking about anything, just doing my thing. When this happened, it snapped me fully alert and aware. This is the reason I never keep my back to anything open behind me longer than I have to, as I don't like the idea of something like that coming up behind me again. The funny thing is that the room I was in at the time was Mrs. Lindsay's. For some reason, I didn't realize that until just a few months ago, though I'm pretty sure it doesn't correlate with anything that she ever said, but nothing about that encounter seemed very angelic to me. "3 years ago, I met who was now my best friend, Kay, through working in a restaurant. We immediately found that we had similar interests. Oh, you're a girl that likes gaming? Word, let's hang out. We were about 21 and 22 at the time. Fast forward to our first day hanging out outside of work. We go to a brewery downtown because we shared the same similar craving for this thing on the menu called crack fries. They're seasoned to absolute perfection and tossed in truffle oil. I would recommend 10 out of 10. We had some beers, talked about school, and eventually decided to check out what events were going on in the Park Circle downtown while we sobered up. The Park Circle had different events going on throughout the week. Swing dancing on Tuesdays, jazz on Wednesdays. It was a Wednesday, and I wanted to check to see if the jazz event was in season. "Aw, shoot," I said as I glanced out to the circle to what appeared to be a church event. "It's not for another month." The church event was playing this chill and ambient instrumental music. The weather finally crept its way up to 70 degrees and sunny. We decided to stay, pitched up a hammock, and enjoyed the artsy musical culture our city holds in the Park Circle. Kay had never hammocked before or seen the events in the circle, so I was pretty stoked to share what would be a new experience for her. We're facing each other, sharing stories from our pasts, tugging at the ropes to rock the hammock back and forth. It was a great first friend date. We're laughing, just two peas in a pod, looking up at the finely blue sky of springtime, watching the sunlight flitter through the treetops overhead. Until the greasy, cracked-out face of a man hovered into our vision. "Looks like fun. Mind if I join you?" He uninvitedly plopped his backpack against the tree holding our hammock strap. I said, and we exchanged an unsettled glance and immediately sat upright to face the man. It was broad daylight, and homeless people sometimes meandered towards the circle and sat under the shaded trees just to hang out. Some asked for money, but most kept to themselves. There's nothing out of the ordinary, but I was kind of creeped out by the guy. Didn't think much of it because I'm used to interactions with homeless people. My mother was homeless, so I guess you could say I have a soft spot for having a conversation about their life, not giving them money, maybe offering a cigarette, and leaving it at that. Kay hasn't had that experience, so she kept glancing back at me for some support of what the hell we should do. The guy decides that he's welcome, cracks open a 40 in a crinkled paper bag and takes a few swigs. He extends his can to offer us some. We decline and ask him what he's doing.
Just seeing what's going on down there. Noticed a large group down there.
He pointed a dirty stub of a fingernail out to the circle. Saw you two set up and thought this swingy thing looked cool. I already considered saying, "Oh, we're just leaving," but he watched us set up. Getting up and packing up now after being there for only 10 or 20 minutes would only indicate fear. Kay raised an eyebrow at me, and I'm fairly new to the whole hammocking thing, so I'm trying to quickly devise how to casually grab my hammock, what excuse sounds most believable to make an exit, and nope right out of there. He gives the typical creeper interview questions. Where are you from? What are you doing? We give him short replies, hoping maybe he'll take a hint and go bother someone else. He only got closer.
What is this?
He starts rocking our hammock. Kay's eyes cut into mine with panic. A hammock, I said.
Where do you buy them? Thinking about getting one of my own.
I mean, maybe this guy genuinely wants to buy a hammock and is socially inept, not realizing rocking two girls in a hammock is creepy as fuck. I look down to the circle. Everyone's just doing their church thing. I look towards the walking paths that spiral out from the circle. I give passers-by a wide-eyed look of, please help us. They exchange the same look of, well, that's creepy, sucks to be you girls, and continue walking. I look to the other side of the road and see a strange construction van pull up, the plate obscured. There was no business information on the side, but then again, my uncle drives a similar van for work. I expected to see a construction worker come out, but it's a man, dressed in business casual, talking on a cell phone. We'll call him BC for business casual guy. The homeless man nods his head at BC, who starts slowly and casually making his way towards us while maintaining his conversation. BC is speaking a different language. I assume it's Hindi because I had a friend, Andrea, who grew up half Indian with her native-speaking grandma and her father. By her family's interactions, I could usually tell when something serious was going down, family, money issues, etc. Sometimes I'd pick up small words in their conversations and try to understand what they meant. I was studying French in college at the time and learned that once you learn a language, it can become pretty universal. You don't just understand that language, you pick up on similar sounding vowels and words which hold a pretty similar meaning. From that you can kind of decipher a translation. From BC's body language and words, and how he kept looking towards us with purgatory eyes, I felt completely hollowed out. And then the feeling of a lead weight sank in my chest when I heard him say, "Dularak." In a Hindi to French to English conversion that my brain puzzled together, "du" is similar to "deux," which is similar to "two." Larak, rest of the word cut out, was pronounced in a way that reminded me of what Andrea's grandmother called us when we were in middle school, before she translated to her broken English and said, "girls." BC discreetly motioned towards us. I took out my cell phone and brought up an old text, pretending I just got it. "Hey, Kay, looks like Chris and Jordan are here. They're looking for us right now." I throw my body off the hammock, unclip it from the loop, and swiftly pull the hammock straps from the tree. Kay never took a hammock down before, but learned very quickly. We threw the jumbled heap of hammock and its straps in my backpack, and the homeless man called after us.
"Hey, where are you going?"
We swiveled into a crowd of people, and when I turned, I saw the homeless man and BC speaking, motioning angrily back towards us. We scrambled through the crowds of people and down a few side streets until we were out of sight. Later, we told my aunt and uncle when we got to my house. By the way, this is my friend Kay, and here's what happened." My aunt's eyes were cold, and she told us that sex trafficking and abductions of young women had been on the rise in our city. Pulling women into vans from the side of the road or using markers of objects or people to indicate targets. And we were a very visible target, sitting nearby a street in a highlighter yellow hammock. Creepy business casual dude driving to work and homeless guy who probably scored a natural ice for keeping us distracted? Let's not meet. And let's hope that you don't meet any other Ladikian or any girls ever. This is the tale as relayed to me by my father. He swears it's entirely true and has talked about it much over the years. My grandfather has backed up the elements of the story known to him. As a young man in 1982, before he met my mother, my father read law at Liverpool University, England. Whilst there, he began a somewhat fiery and ultimately doomed relationship with a fellow student who hailed from London. At the end of Christmas term, in a last-ditch attempt to salvage their rapidly deteriorating relationship, they decided that rather than going their separate ways immediately, the young lady would instead drive them back to London so they could spend a few days with their parents before he headed back to his own family in Norfolk in time for Christmas Day. To cut a long story short, they didn't even get as far as London before it became clear that nothing was going to fix the unfixable, and that with the distractions of the university behind them, they had even less in common than they had hoped. The relationship officially ended at the Watford Gap service station on the M1 motorway in Northamptonshire, where, by mutual consent, my father alighted from his now ex-girlfriend's Austin Allegro, and she drove off without so much as a glance in the rearview mirror. By now it was tea time, and my father was at least 100 miles from home. He phoned his father and explained the situation, and his father said that, yes, he could come and get him, but not until the following day because he had been drinking wine all afternoon with friends at the golf club, and mother didn't drive. As you can imagine, my father was now not in the best of moods, having been dumped by his girlfriend and temporarily abandoned by his father. Rather than spending the night at the service station, my father, being a man of some means even as a student, determined that he would see if there were more amenable lodgings elsewhere. So he set off across some fields behind the service station and headed for the lights of the nearest village, which turned out to be a little settlement called Watford. Here he came across an old Georgian-era inn called the Henley Arms, where he was able to order some dinner, a couple of beers, and a bed for the night. Retiring to his room, my father soon dropped off to sleep. In the middle of the night, however, he was awoken by the sound of giggling coming from somewhere in his room. He immediately turned the light on, but no one was there. Puzzled, he went to check the time before trying to get back to sleep, but found that his watch was no longer on his bedside table. It was a very expensive Omega that his father had given him for passing his A-levels, so he immediately panicked and began to search the room to find it. It was nowhere to be found. The bedroom door was locked from the inside with the key still in the lock, so it was clear no one could have sneaked in and stolen the watch. My father was now angry and confused, and he struggled to get back to sleep. Eventually, he did fall asleep, and when he woke, he found his watch on the bedside table, exactly where he had originally placed it. The watch had stopped at around 3 a.m., which again was strange as he always wound it before bed. At breakfast, my father raised the curious incident with the landlord, who expressed no surprise whatsoever. The landlord told him matter-of-factly that it must have been Patches. According to the landlord, similar goings-on had occurred there for hundreds of years, prompting numerous investigations, including a famous one by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The landlord said that Patches was most likely the spirit of a young woman, and whilst she was somewhat mischievous, she never did anyone any harm. Some hours later, my father was reunited with his own father, my grandfather, and returned home safely to Norfolk. Later that same Christmas holiday, at a carol service, he met my mother. My father has never returned to that inn. if this is all over the place. I've tried to block out a lot of it. I'm 22 now, but when I was 18, I was using Tinder and was pretty new at it, only having it for a few months. I'm pretty sure this was the last month of my senior year. Also, I am terrified of meeting someone who isn't who they say or has bad intentions, as I've been harmed before. I always texted my best friends and dad what I was doing, where, and who with, including a picture. I told them if I didn't text them within a half hour of the meeting time to call me. I matched with a guy on it named Aaron, and we started talking. Side note, I'm 5'9", and though I don't have a problem dating a guy an inch or two shorter than me, I do prefer my height or taller. Aaron and I planned to meet up at our local family fun park, go-karts, mini-golf, bumper boats, etc. That night, we went mini-golfing, and I drove all the way there and texted that I'm there. It was early, so I walked up to the front of the place and stood outside waiting for him. I see one guy, and I'm praying it's not him. It's not. I stand there a little longer and see someone matching Aaron's picture walking towards me, but I realize that he's shorter in person than he seemed in pictures. He walks up, and he's at least 4 inches shorter than me. He asks my name, confirming if it's me. I say yes, and long story short, I'm super uncomfortable already, and we eventually make our way inside and then go to the back outside area with the mini-golf. I see my friend from high school at the checkout counter for the mini-golf and give him a help me look. He doesn't comprehend or couldn't help. Aaron and I go to mini-golf and make it through the course pretty quickly. The entire time he is making uncomfortable jokes and sexual comments, and I'm barely responding in full sentences. When we're done, we sit down at the tables in the back and talk for a bit, mainly about him and his sexual escapades and how college is for him. I'm extremely anxious and uncomfortable at this point, not too far from a panic attack. After about 10 minutes, the whole date lasted maybe 45 minutes, I say that I really need to get home and stand up. He followed, and we end up back outside in front of the place. He shrugs and says he had fun, leaning in for a hug. I hug back, but let go after a second. I feel him hold on, and panic sets in. I know he's going to try to kiss me. We both lean back, and he looks up at me, puckers his lips, and starts leaning in. I back up and stand taller, saying, "No." He pauses and laughs. "What?" All I could say was no again, and he laughed again, saying, "No kiss?" I shake my head and say no a third time. He says, "One kiss?" I again shake my head and say no, starting to walk away. He follows me, asking, "Come on, just one kiss." I more firmly say no and keep walking, grabbing my purse at my side. I have my keys in my hand and am 10 feet from my truck. He's still following me, and he says, "Just one kiss. Come on, kiss me." This time, I'm 4 feet from the taillight of my truck, and I dig into my purse. I pull out my pepper spray and turn towards him, pointing it at him, and say a final no. He holds up his hands and laughs. "Okay." He starts stepping backwards. "Well, I'll see you for our second date." I probably gave him an "are you stupid" look before booking it into my truck, locking the doors and checking around me. He was nowhere to be seen. I started my truck and immediately called my best friend, near tears at this point, and was unable to catch my breath, but trying to stop the panic attack from happening. She answers after a few rings and asks me if I'm okay right away, knowing I had the date. I quickly, breathing heavy, run through what just happened as I'm driving out of the parking lot. I tell her I can't breathe and that I'm terrified, and what if he follows my truck? She's comforting me as I drive and rationalizing for me. I asked her to stay on the line while I drove home, and she does. So, Aaron, Tinder dude who couldn't take no for an answer, don't ever come near me again. A few years ago, my ex-husband and I moved our new little family into a cute 3-bedroom house. It was painted blue and therefore has since been called the Blue House. The first week there, we were in our living room watching television when a massive shadow went up the wall behind us, onto the ceiling where a mist formed with it. It moved across the ceiling, down the hallway, and disappeared into the nursery. I was a diehard skeptic at this time. My ex-husband asked me if I saw it. I'm ashamed to say I told him I had and that it was merely someone's headlights outside. He argued that the windows were not near any road and the mist was not explained by that theory. I shrugged it off and accepted my explanation anyway. We began having experiences hearing footsteps running down the hallway to the bathroom, banging and scratching on the walls, toys turning on and off without batteries, hearing children cry outside the nursery window, large shadow and mist movement daily, a full-body apparition of a woman, the kids complaining they could not sleep because they would not leave them alone, cold spots, lights flickering and going off, sounds of heavy furniture being moved around in the vacant bedroom, the television going on and off on its own, accompanied by an odd, high-pitched hum, and sometimes a faint sound of music. I continued to find explanations for all of these events, and ignored what I could. As things escalated, everyone in the household experienced nightmares, and some of us began sleepwalking. I was one of them, and I had the most frequent episodes. I would wake up under the kitchen table, on the floor in odd places, and even outside. There would be mud on my feet and other signs that I had been outside. My family said I would have my eyes open, but did not respond to them like myself, and I just seemed vacant. We were advised to try and get EVPs, to talk to it, to ask questions. Doing this was our undoing. We caught some low-class EVPs in the question and answer stage. Nothing alarming or conclusive. Following our EVP session, when we went to bed, something growled. I was in bed, and my ex-husband was reaching up to the ceiling fan to turn the light off, leaving the fan on. Something growled angrily from the foot of the bed. I thought it was our dog, but I found her at my mother's feet, in the den where she had been when I left to go to bed. We searched our property outside, found nothing. Even after all that, I was convinced some stray or even my dog growling must have been what we heard. Later that night, I woke up to something strange. My computer monitor was visible at the foot of the bed. Standing in front of the monitor was the silhouette of my shirtless ex-husband. His back was to me, and he was just standing there. I called out to him, but he didn't answer or turn around. Something told me to look at his side of the bed. I did, and nothing was there. I looked back, and my husband had vanished into thin air. I realized that what I had seen couldn't have been a person. I smelled something burning. Then the covers began to be pulled down off of me. I froze. The air conditioner was a window unit. It began to beep and go from low fan to medium fan to high fan, and then back to low over and over. In unison with each fan cycle change, the blinds were flipping open and shut, along with banging on the walls. I suddenly became a little girl. I felt like all the air had been sucked out of my body. I couldn't take air in to make a sound, and I'm embarrassed to say I urinated myself. When I finally could take air in, I gasped and began screaming for my mother like a child. I mustered the courage to finally move and reached for the doorknob next to the bed. At that moment, my husband came in and flipped the light on, at which point everything stopped. He had been in the bathroom vomiting. His mysterious illness stopped right then as well. I started looking for a new home. I was no longer the skeptic. Before moving, I found a necklace on my dresser one day. I thought it was left there as a gift, so I put it on thinking nothing of it. A couple of days later, I woke up to a blinding headache. My husband had got up to get my migraine medicine, but fainted just outside our bedroom. I got up and went down too. I crawled to the kids' room, and I found my son first. I got him roused enough to help him walk outside. I went back into the house for my daughter and husband. My husband crawled out while I located our daughter. She was 3 at the time. I found her tiny little body blue and unresponsive in her bedroom. I drug her out the front door thinking after I called 911, I would return to the home and lay down. I believed my daughter was dead and wished to follow. My thinking obviously was very muddled. I went in and retrieved our phone, passing out twice in the process. When I returned to the front door, my daughter's eyes were wide open, so I laid down in the yard and called for help. When paramedics and firemen arrived, I was told we had carbon monoxide poisoning. The firemen said 30 per square feet was lethal, and my home was over 500 per square feet. Just sort of barbecuing in the living room, no explanation for those levels was found in the home. No one in my family knew where that necklace had come from. I removed it at the hospital and left it there. We moved shortly after that. The last night, everyone was at our new home while I was at the Blue House cleaning so we could collect our deposit. I was tired from the night before. The whispers and the banging on the walls was relentless. I was in my bedroom when someone knocked on the door. I went and looked through the peephole to see the silhouette of a man I believed to be the neighbor across the street. I saw him lean down and look into the peephole as well, and then a bright light behind him appeared. He just turned and walked away. I opened the door, and there was no one there. After shutting the door, I realized he had stooped down to look in the peephole at me. How was that possible, I thought? He wasn't taller than me. Anxiety hit as it began to hit me that the tall man could not have been my neighbor or any normal human being. My lungs started to seize up, and I rushed to the bedroom to get my rescue inhaler out of my purse. That's the last thing I remember. The next thing I can recall, I was being slammed into a wall, falling from a standing position. I was in the living room. I was freezing. I had never been so cold. I looked around and was very confused about where I was. I didn't recognize the house without our furnishings. I was so cold at that point, my jaw was chattering. I wandered briefly through the home, trying to get my bearings as to where I was. I got into the bathroom, and at that point, I began to have this deja vu feeling. Like I knew this place, but I couldn't put it together in my head. Everything was fuzzy and slow moving. I was desperate to get warm. I could see in the mirror that my lips were blue. What the hell is wrong with me, I thought. I began filling the tub with hot water, and I stripped, quickly climbing in. As the water filled and my body began to warm up, I saw my cell phone on the floor next to the tub. It must have fallen out of my bra when I was undressing. I used to keep my cell phone in my bra along with money, etc. So I picked it up and I called my husband. When he answered, I started crying, I just woke up, I'm so cold. He was frantic. Where are you? Where have you been? I've been calling you for hours. You didn't come home. I looked around the bathroom. I finally recognized it. I told him I was at the Blue House. Babe, where have you been? We last spoke over 5 hours ago. It's 3 a.m. It took about a half an hour to warm my body enough that I could just get out of the tub. My husband came and got me, and I was so confused to even figure out how to get my home on my own. I took about a half an hour to warm my body, enough that I could get out of the tub. My husband came and got me. I was way too confused to even figure out how to get to my home on my own. I can't express how terrifying this was. It turns out the man I thought I saw had passed away. I don't know what I was doing in that 5 hours. It's scary to be up doing things with no recollection of it, and I don't know what happened to me that night or why. Seizure, maybe? I try not to think about it. We have continued to have issues, but very mild in comparison. We lost one of our children to suicide about a year after moving. I can't help wonder if it had anything to do with what attacked me. Had it attacked him after leaving the blue house? He left no note, and we're forever left not knowing. I have accepted that there are no answers for me. My best friend lives next door to the blue house, and she says that the new neighbors don't complain of having any issues. She had experienced something every time she had come into the blue house when I lived there, but she has not experienced anything while on any of her visits to see the new neighbors. I'm too terrified to even pass by that house. I don't visit her in her home. She comes to visit me. I am a shadow of the person I once was. The events at the blue house severely traumatized me and my family. My son's death sent me over the edge into a full nervous breakdown, which is not as dramatic as it may sound. I simply quit functioning. I closed myself off from the world and just stopped. I could not remember how to do a job I had done daily for 5 years. I had to be walked through it daily until I was finally terminated. I cried so much that my face was chapped all the time. Even now, 4 years later, I'm struggling to reclaim my life. I pray no one else comes into contact with whatever that thing was. Sharing this helps me let it go and heal, and I'm open to any alternate explanations and discussions. You don't have to agree with me, and you can even think I'm crazy. I only ask that you be respectful. Crazy or not, my life has been shattered into pieces because of what I experienced. Thank you. Shine on. My extended family owns and runs a huge ranch, one plot approaching 9,200 acres, in total about 14,000. The terrain is mostly rolling hill chaparral, a super thick, thorny brush, with several draws and some forested patches. This was the best place to grow up as a kid, and several of my fondest memories still involve that ranch. And one of my creepiest. I was about 11 at the time, my cousin about 14. For some prior time, we couldn't find around 11 head of our cattle from the herd. Nothing strange, occasionally a group will separate for a few days. But we'd recently had some heavy rains, and there was a section of fence that would regularly wash out. My uncle ordered us to go check that stretch of fence to see if it was damaged. We hiked down and found that indeed the fence was damaged. We hiked back to the house, packed up supplies, and saddled a couple of horses to go fix the fence. On our way back out, we found all but one of the missing cows. We were still missing a calf. We decided that since it was going to take a while, we'd camp out if it was cool with my uncle. It was with a couple of rules. The standard camp in the designated area. Fires only in the fire ring, and take a gun for each of you. We saddled up, fixed the fence within a couple of hours, and then headed for the campground. The camp was on a slough, a narrow swampy pond, and cut into the chaparral, so it was very secluded, and you'd never really know it was there unless you knew. We sat up and talked and fished and just made a night of it. At about 3 a.m., we noticed some light from the other side of the slough. A lantern. We got very quiet, turned off all of our lights, and watched as a man of probably 55, very dirty and disheveled, came down to the water's edge. He took a couple of shots with a small rifle at nothing, luckily not in our direction, filled a large jug with water, then stripped naked and began bathing. The entire time he was talking to himself and just generally acting unsettling, especially to a couple of prepubescents who thought they were tough. After an hour, he left. We took turns sleeping and guarding for the next few hours till the sun came up. We headed home and told my aunt and uncle what we had witnessed, and they rode down in an ATV but didn't find anything. We found out later we'd given bad directions, and a week later more rain, another missing group of cattle, and another order to go back to check the fence. We rode down and noticed the brand new fence had been cut. We figured it was poachers, or occasionally we would get some undocumented immigrants that would traverse our land en route to the closest city. We decided we would look for the person, because we'd come across immigrants in distress once before, and my aunt had fed them and got them some water and then sent them on their way. I don't know why we didn't think of the man from the week before. I guess he just seemed kind of feeble and harmless, and we thought he was just passing through, even though he'd given us quite the creep. We looked around for a while and didn't find anyone and decided we'd head back to the house. As we got near the camp, we decided to go where the man had been previously. It was a very clear and fresh trail headed into the chaparral. We hitched the horses and followed it by foot. About 200 yards in, we saw a makeshift shed made from old plywood and raw lumber. We saw the big jug the man had filled, and we found our missing calf, dead and mutilated. We freaked and ran back to the horses and then went home. We told my uncle what we had found, and he rushed down with us. We showed him the calf and the shed. He opened the shed, shotgun in hand, and found the guy asleep inside. He calmly but firmly woke the guy and demanded he explain himself. He sent my cousin back to the house on an ATV to call the sheriff and lead him back to us. I stayed with my uncle to help with this guy. We found his rifle in the corner of the shack and removed it from his reach. The shack was something else, too. Porn pictures on the walls like wallpaper. Human waste in one corner, terrible smell, and yet another mutilated calf behind it. The guy had been living there for some time. He wasn't eating the calves, not much of them at least, just mutilating them. Eventually, the sheriff made it down, arrested him, and he was eventually charged with and convicted of several crimes: trespassing, destruction of property, cattle rustling, etc. The rifle and various other articles were stolen from the area as well. He also had canned food that was stolen from a fridge pantry in a barn near our house, so he'd been sneaking up there as well. After the shack was no longer of interest to the law, we burned it down. Turns out, the guy had once been a normal dude from the city, but decided to check out of society and creep around the woods. In 1992, I had the happy fortune to reconnect with my best friend from high school. We shared the type of friendship that, though 16 years had passed by without communicating, we picked up right after we left off. Bonus points, our then husbands got along and our kids adored each other. It wasn't too long after Patsy announced that they were buying a house on the other side of town. That house, well, that's where the story really begins. Originally, Patsy wanted to wait for me to see it until after they were settled in, but within a week or two, I started feeling subtle changes in my friend. She was always tired after working all day as a housekeeper at a motel, but now she seemed even more so, with dark circles starting to form under her eyes, and she seemed a bit agitated, jumping at sounds and shadows. Since I was babysitting her kids while she worked, we saw each other almost daily. When I asked if everything was all right, she just said it was stress over the move, trying to get things settled while working, and that she and Jerry were fighting a bit more than usual. He'd had an affair and she hadn't quite forgiven him. My instincts said differently. There was more to it than that, but I've never been one to pressure people to talk. Sometimes, clearing our coffee cups, I would get impressions that I really didn't like. Normally, I keep myself shielded from even family and friends to at least some degree, because reading someone like this is pretty much an invasion of their privacy. But sometimes, if the emotions are very strong, I can't help but pick up on them. One particular emotion came through loud and clear. Something was causing my friend to actually feel afraid. I reached out, trying to pick up on what caused the fear, but it wasn't clear. Apparently, whatever it was didn't have a clear form in her mind. Sometimes I saw an inverted cross or felt anger. I saw her and her husband arguing, things of that nature. It was a jumbled mess, which told me that even her own thoughts weren't clear. I remember it was a weekday, the kids were in school, the husband's at work, when Patsy showed up at my door. I thought it odd that she had the day off, but she admitted to having called in sick. And I looked at her and said, "Well, are you sick?" And in a flat, monotone voice, she replied, "Maybe in my head." The way she said it gave me a chill in the pit of my stomach, so I brought her into the kitchen for a coffee and a talk. Barely seated, Patsy reached into her purse, taking out her cigarettes and a new pack of playing cards. The seal hadn't even been broken. She laid the deck on the table by me, fired up a cigarette, and said, "Do a reading for me." For Patsy to ask for a reading, that was serious stuff indeed. When we had first met, she was one of the all-time great deniers of anything paranormal. In fact, the very first time I ever did a reading for her was just to prove it could be done, since we didn't really know each other. She thought she'd be able to pull the "ha! In your face" with it. But after I had described her mother, to a T, whom I had never even met, in an argument that they'd had, Patsy became more open-minded, at least when it came to me. Over time, she accepted that there was more to this world than we knew or understood. She also understood it was no parlor game for me and had witnessed some of my struggles to control various aspects of these gifts that I had. I took one look at the layout of the cards and said, "Pats, would you be okay with me seeing the house now?" She replied, "You see something." It was more of a statement than a question, and I nodded. I said, "Care to share?" "Not yet." And then I added, "It could be off, Pats. You know I'm not always right. I just think your house would help crystallize what I'm feeling." She said, "Yeah, you're only right like 99.99% of the time, but if you think we should..." I just said, "I want to stop by St. Mary's first." The priest at St. Mary's knew me, and I knew he wouldn't question my wanting holy water and blessed oil. I also knew that he would happily come bless a non-Catholic home for me, which I wanted to happen shortly after I visited the place. But first, I wanted to put Patsy's question of sanity at ease, and maybe get a few answers for her. Walking up to the 2-story house, everything seemed in order. Empty moving boxes neatly stacked in the carport, lawn neatly trimmed, and inside you could tell unpacking was still going on, but the bulk of it was done. I walked through the living room and started down the hall. Patsy asked where I was going, and I said, "Your bedroom." "Val, you've never been here. How do you know where my room is?" I shot her a look, and she gave a shaky laugh. "Okay, yeah, ask a silly question, huh?" I just said, "It's okay, Pats. The cards told me, and to anyone else that would sound crazy." But Pats just nodded. Just inside her room, I stopped dead and gasped, "What the heck is up with that?" I pointed at the upside-down cross. Normally, I'd question if it was a St. Peter's cross, but Patsy was Baptist. Inverted crosses were viewed as demonic by her. "It keeps doing that," Patsy said, coming out in a harsh whisper. "And does it now?" I dragged her dressing table bench over and climbed up to bring the cross down to examine it. I studied the hanger on its back. "Is this new?" I asked, and she nodded. "Well, I think I see the problem. See the hanger bar? It's at the bottom of the crossbeam. It might just be top-heavy. Give me a little hammer and I'll fix it for you." I wasn't completely sure that was the problem, but it was a possibility, and I really wanted to be sure on what I was feeling. While I waited for Patsy to return, I prayed over the cross and repeated my prayer for protection. Slowly, I was letting my shields down. I traced a cross with the oil where the cross would hang, then climbed down, opened the windows in the room, walked over, and then opened the closet door. When Patsy returned, I moved the hanger bar to the center of the cross's crossbeam and rehung it. After that, together, we blessed the perimeter of the room, including the closet, with holy water, and I blessed every opening with the holy oil while reciting the Our Father. We moved through the entire house doing that, with Patsy saying, "This is my home now," and other similar phrases. Finally, we moved down to the basement where I knew she was waiting. I walked over to a workbench that lined one wall, and it was really old looking, heavy oak. I closed my eyes for a moment, cocked my head, and said, "Here, there was something box-like. Jerry moved it." I looked at Patsy and said, "Jerry has lots of accidents down here, doesn't he?" She said yes, and some of them were very, very strange, like things hitting him from out of nowhere. Literally, he'd get struck by things flying and tools being moved when he was down there by himself. I spoke to the room. "I'm here. Talk to me. Do you need help? That's all I really want to do is help you." Patsy was rubbing her upper arms, and I was getting goosebumps myself. Along with this chill came this tingling. It was a cobwebby feeling, and I always get that when spirits are near. I dialed back my shields a notch, and I don't know how else to explain it. I wanted to be able to communicate with this entity, but I was not willing to be completely open to it. To do that would be completely foolish. A combination of sadness, confusion, and anger washed over me. I saw a haggard-looking woman in a faded flowered patterned dress being bullied by a large pot-bellied man. Their mode of dress reminded me of the 1930s, and what I saw, he grabbed her arm and struck her several times about the head and shoulders with what appeared to be a shirt. I cried involuntarily while describing what I was seeing to Patsy, and when I heard the words, "You call this clean?" it was growled. And therein followed a montage of instances of abuse at his hands, each worse than the last. I felt tears spilling down my cheeks as I wept. "He's beating her with an umbrella. I mean, he just keeps hitting her." I was relaying all this to Patsy, wincing with each crash of the umbrella. In a flash, I saw the same woman, but as a child, being mistreated by another male, maybe her father, and then this man who professed to love her doing the same thing. This woman had grown to believe that all men were like this, and with that belief came hate. By now, Patsy had wrapped her arms around me, and I was trying to give her some comfort. I was struggling to get out verbally the scenes that she couldn't see, and the onslaught of feelings that choked me to the point where I was kneeling on the floor. "It's Jerry," I finally managed to squeak out. "She hates him." I saw Patsy's eyes grow wide and knew she worried over the safety of their young son also. I patted her arm. "Bobby's safe. He's only a boy. It's full-grown men she has a problem with. She thinks she's protecting you from him. She hears the arguing and fears for you." "Oh, God, Pats, she doesn't understand. She's putting you through hell because of your man." My voice broke, and in that instance, I knew the truth about Jerry, what it was about him that I didn't like. "Does he hurt you?" I looked into my friend's eyes. "I mean, not with fists, but in other ways. She's fighting for you." At least that's the way I saw it. In her own fashion, this ghost lady was only trying to protect Patsy from the same fate that she had suffered. Think about it, Pats. Everything has been pointed at Jerry, not you or the kids. I asked Patsy what she wanted me to do, and I could try and help the ghost to cross over, or try and establish ground rules for cohabitation. Patsy was quiet for a moment, and then asked if the ghost lady was responsible for all the unexplained stuff that went on. I said I thought so, at least she's the only one I felt or saw. so we decided to send her on her way. Patsy wasn't just comfortable with a residing spirit hanging out in her house. I started by thanking her for being there for my friend, and saying how sorry we both were that she had suffered, but she was free to go, and Jerry was not like that. Sure, they argued, but he was never abusive to her, other than the arguments that they had, and those went both ways. Then I asked if she needed help to cross over, or if there was anything else we could do for her. At that point, Patsy swears she felt a hug, and then the lady simply disappeared. At least I no longer felt her. The cross in Patsy's bedroom never did flip upside down again, and I really don't think the ghost was responsible for that. I think it was just bad craftsmanship. We still had the priest come out to do a house blessing, just to be on the safe side. She and Jerry continued to get along, and that was awesome. They worked through their problems, and they're still happily married. As for the ghost lady, I'm not 100% certain she didn't move on, because every now and again, especially after an argument that they have, Jerry will trip on the basement stairs or get his head bumped on something. Well, you know what? That sort of thing still happens to Patsy too, and if you ask me, it serves them both right for fighting. My message that I will leave to you: don't go to bed angry, love your partner, take care of one another, and don't have the afterlife coming back to remind you to just love. This happened about 15 years ago. At the time, I was dating around and I had a few creepy encounters during that time, but this guy takes the cake. He was an acquaintance my brother had met at a bar a few times and was showing him around the local area because he was new to the country. My brother set us up because he was apparently desperate for a girlfriend, and I guess I was pretty desperate too, because we did go on a date together. That date was probably the worst first date I've ever been on. I showed up to the restaurant we were meeting at. He was late, which isn't a huge deal, so I let it slide, and then we went to sit down. To be honest, I knew from the start I wasn't really attracted to him, but I thought I would be polite and see if we had a nice night. He started off politely too. He held the door for me, pulled my seat out. It wasn't really necessary, but it was nice anyway. Then, when we were sitting down waiting for someone to come and take our orders, I was reading the menu, and he started talking about how much his fiancée would have liked this place. That took me by surprise, and naturally I asked about his fiancée. He revealed that he had another fiancée before moving over her, but he had just left her to move to another country. I asked why they had broken up, and he said they never really broke up as such, but he got fed up with her nagging him about various things and just moved away. I really didn't know what to say after that, so I changed the subject and started asking him more about himself and where he used to live. He wasn't really very forthcoming. Eventually, our waiter turned up and started talking to us. To clarify for the next part, our waiter was a man of color, and he had an unusual accent for our area. So my date stares blankly at him for a while, then turns to me and says, "You understand this guy?" I said yes, I could understand him, before telling him our orders. After he left, my lovely date continued to shock me. He said, "I wouldn't normally leave ordering to the lady, but that brown guy talked really weirdly and I didn't get it." Wow, way to tell me you're a racist and a sexist in one breath, dude. Again, I was speechless for a few moments before I got angry with him. I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was something along the lines of, "Well, I'm not a lady, so I can order for myself just fine, thanks. And why make racial remarks?" Then he got annoyed with me and told me he wasn't being racist, he just wasn't used to that kind of person where he was from. I pointed out that he wouldn't have met me if he just stuck to people he was used to in his own country. He calmed down and told me he wouldn't want that because he's glad he met me. Honestly, I found that a little weird, given that I didn't see any way to say that this date was going well, and he didn't know me very well at all. But I decided since we had ordered, I should stay, get my meal, and try to redeem the evening before I left and never saw this man ever again. So I answered some of his questions about me, basic getting to know me and small talk stuff for the most part, then started on about my previous dates. If I was a virgin, whether I would be willing to wait until marriage and then be submissive to my husband or not. It was at this point I realized that I was most likely on a date with a religious bigot, hence the misogyny, weird attitude to sexual stuff, and all his other close-minded bullshit. So, I settled for a none of your business, now I need to leave. I checked the prices on the menu and left money for my half of the food plus a tip on the table and got up to leave. He said he didn't see why I was being unreasonable with him, as though this had been a normal date, but then told me that I couldn't expect him to take my money because that was an insult to him. Fine, dude, you want to pay for a meal that's not getting eaten? You pay for it. I'm not that mad about spending my money that I'll stop you. So I took my money back and walked straight out. I just assumed that yes, it was an awful evening, and I wouldn't have to see him again. I wasn't even back to my house when my brother started texting me, asking where I was because my date had called him in tears, saying I had gone off for no reason, and he didn't know where I was or what to do. Thankfully, my brother was pretty calm about it and assumed that I had left for a reason. I explained everything to him, and he was pretty surprised too. After that night, we both tried to cut contact. My brother stopped meeting up with the guy, and we both blocked the Facebook account we had for him too. My brother had also blocked his number because he would not stop texting him, asking him about me, alternating between being really worried about me to saying he hoped I dropped dead. Then he started making endless different accounts on social media to harass us. He told my brother he didn't know why we weren't talking to him. He posted a bunch of weird posts describing me in detail before going on to call me a lot of horrible names. He kept blocking them and moving on. Then, the harassment got worse. He either found me and followed me at some point, or got my address from a friend and turned up one day, standing around outside of my house, asking to come in and speak with me. When I refused to let him in, he grabbed my arm to prevent me from going in and started to tell me that he didn't want to let me go because I would never find a man who would love me like he did, and that if I walked away from him again, I would regret it one day when I was old and lonely. He went on and on like this for ages and ages while I tried to pull my arm away from him, before I finally got fed up of this and yelled at him to get off me and leave me alone, and then kicked him in the shin. He let go of my arm but cursed at me and said I was being ungrateful to him, but I took my opportunity to run inside and lock my door. He started banging on my door and then trying to push it inwards. I was getting both upset by this man and just super fed up of his presence in my life, so I grabbed my phone and called the police, telling them that someone was trying to get inside my house. I was told someone would be with me soon, but 20 to 30 minutes later, there was no sign of them anywhere, and I was getting quite upset because this man was forcing my door, and I thought the lock was going to break soon. So I called my brother, who lived nearby, just because I knew he would come, even though I wasn't sure he would be able to help much. About 15 minutes later, my brother turns up, and after a brief conversation I didn't quite hear outside, the pressure was going off the door. I waited a few minutes and then texted my brother to see what was going on and if it would be all right to look outside now. He didn't reply, and the next thing I heard was the police turning up. I went out to see what was going on. Apparently, after my initial call, they had received another call from a neighbor saying there were two men fighting on my lawn. I guess this was my brother and the guy, since my brother looked out of breath and pretty shook up, and the guy wasn't around anymore. My brother explained to the police that he had tried to stop the man from getting into my house, and that the man had hit him. I told my side of the story, and some of my other neighbors were asked what they had seen and were able to tell them about his attempts to get in. Plus, there were marks on the outer side of the door where he had tried repeatedly to get in. The police went to look for him, and a few weeks afterward I was called and told that they thought they had found him, but they wanted me to look at the suspected person. It wasn't the same man. I didn't hear anything else, and I don't know what happened to him. I didn't see him again, so I'm probably safer after 15 years. Regardless, I don't ever want to see him again. Sometimes I find myself drowning in the memories of paranormal experiences that still linger in the back of my head from day to day. Some things just simply can't be unseen. I think that spirits, demons, or whatever they may be, are beings that no living person could ever understand. In this case, seeing is believing is a good way to simply word it up for you non-believers out there. Maybe a family member, a friend, or even some stranger has told you that they have seen a ghost, and you've thought it was ridiculous. I think anyone could understand why that is. My life was pretty ordinary when I was a young kid. After my encounters, every part of my life changed. The way I thought, the way I saw life. I changed for the better, and suddenly the things that remained unanswered in my head made sense to me. I was blind, but now I can see. There are things that have happened to me that I've never been able to compare with anything else. Things that would make your spine rattle, but every day I muster up the courage to move forward and forget. Although, as I said, some things can never be forgotten. My family owns an old house on the north shore of Scotland, in a place that not many have even ever heard of. I spent a lot of my childhood in this town, and it's called Melnes. It's an isolated place that isn't shown on many maps, but I can bet that anyone who visits will not have a hard time remembering the place. It was mostly highlands, fields, and beaches, probably the most Scottish place anyone could go. I can still smell the salty Atlantic Sea, and the water was pure like it had never been touched, and I can still see the washed-up shipwreck that lay on the sandy shore. My dad had always told me terrifying stories about Melnes and the weird things that happened there when he was just a boy. He told me one specific story that really grabbed my attention. It was about a cave on the beach that is also known to be haunted. As he tells it, he was on the beach one day playing, as there's not much else to do in Melnes. My dad, being brave, decided to go inside this cave. And to the right, when he was inside, there was a very dark corner, pitch black. There was a hole inside the wall of the cave, a hole so dark that no man could ever be brave enough to enter, and he was scared, but he brushed it off and just assumed that if there was anything there, it would be an animal. So, instead of going near it, he just decided to throw some sand in it to try to prove to himself that there was nothing there. It's okay, he thought, as nothing happened. But that was only until a few seconds later. Sand had then been thrown back at him. He was alone, and he didn't stay in the cave. He said he's been back to the cave occasionally, but the one thing that really spooks him to this day is that he never saw that hole again. I experienced my first paranormal event in the house in Melnes. All of my family have seen and heard some weird, unnatural things in the house, and inside it wasn't very scary looking. In fact, it's very homey looking until you spend your first night there. As you walk through the front door, the bathroom is what you first see. It was under the stairs. There were 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom upstairs, and downstairs to the right was the kitchen, and to the left, the living room. In the living room, there was an old red curtain that separated it from the conservatory, and that's where I first encountered something that was somewhat terrifying. One night, we were all asleep. Me, my sister, my dad, and my papa. I was pretty young, maybe around 6. I had woken up and dragged myself downstairs to the bathroom, and when I had gotten to the bottom of the stairs, I couldn't help but notice that the curtain that led to the conservatory was blowing as if the outside door was open. And it was. It was wide open, which was very strange as we lock all of the doors before we go to bed. But me being young and oblivious to odd things that went on inside the house. I just closed the door, locked it again, and went to the bathroom and then back to bed. The next morning, I was awoken to the sound of my dad calling me from downstairs. I got up and went to see what he was shouting about. When I got there, I said, "Daddy, what is it?" And he pointed to the conservatory and asked if I was up in the night. I slipped past the curtain and realized that the door and all of the windows were wide open again. I was gobsmacked and just explained to him that it wasn't me, and I told him about how I had come down and shut the door. Then, that night, a similar thing happened. Every single kitchen cupboard door was left open. I was young, but I knew none of this was a coincidence. The first time I had ever seen a spirit wasn't in the house, in fact. It was in a rather new house I was living in with my mom and my stepdad. I've always believed that if a spirit was following me, it followed me from Melnes. As you walked into this house, you were immediately in the living room, and there was a door separating the bedrooms and bathrooms. During this occurrence, it happened in the middle of the night, just as I was going to the toilet again. The bathroom door faced the living room, and I passed by it looking through the living room door. You couldn't really see through it properly as it was textured glass, but you could still see shapes, like the couches and the table. But the one thing that caught my eye in the living room still gives me shivers down my spine. I've never seen anything more terrifying in my life. It was a tall black figure, almost like someone was wearing a robe or a dress. As I looked in, I could tell that the figure had turned to me. I screamed at the top of my voice. I thought I was dead. I ran to my mom's room straight away and lost my toenail under the door in the process. I jumped in between my mom and my stepdad, still screaming. I was terrified. My stepdad went through the living room, and the black-cloaked figure that I had seen with my very own eyes was gone, like it had never been there. But as I walked into the room behind him, I felt a disturbing chill that filled the air. I just wished that someone else had seen it so people hadn't thought I was crazy, though I never doubted myself for a second. I never had thought that the second time I would see a ghost, it would be the same dark figure. But it was. I knew right away. The tall black silhouette that I had already seen in my living room had come back to me again. Only this time, I was back in Melnes. It must have been around 2005, and I was 9 years old. I had asked my stepbrother to come downstairs with me so I could go to the bathroom, and he waited outside the bathroom door. It just made me feel a lot more safe. But I still was scared. I couldn't even look in the mirrors at night or even take a glance out the window, as I was scared of what I might see looking back at me. As I was washing my hands in the sink, I suddenly heard a banging and some screaming at the door. It was my stepbrother, and he had obviously seen something that had scared him. I opened the door in a flash, and the first thing that caught my attention was the figure that I had seen before, standing outside the front door. We both hid in the bathroom, sitting in the bathtub blocking the bathroom door with a set of drawers and anything else we could find. For about 3 hours we hid there, not knowing what might be lurking at the other side, just a bit of wood. The only thing that was separating me from the thing that I feared most was a bit of mahogany, and I thought maybe it was a good thing I was seeing it again, to reassure myself that it wasn't my immature imagination. I was just glad I had someone there to see it too. It was just what I needed. From that day on, I was sure it was following me, but what was it? What is a who, but why? A while after that I went to the library with my friend to do some spiritual research, but I found no information that was important to me. It was only recently that I have read some things that explained what my strange black shadow might be. I read about shadow people and demons, but I find all of that really strange. I've never been one to believe in demons. There was just still not enough information to explain to me what was going on. There was one last time that I saw my ghostly follower. At the start of May last year. It had been 9 years since I had last saw it, and sometimes I'd almost forgotten, and I'd finally felt at peace. Until that day. I was staying at my friend's house, and I was sitting on the back corner of his bed. It was against the wall to the right, and in front of me was the television. To the left was a large mirror on the wall. He'd gone out of the room to go for a shower, and I was watching something on TV, when I got a strange itch on my back. I suddenly turned my head towards the mirror, and I saw it. It was right behind me. In the mirror, I saw the spirit I thought had left me, and it was right behind my back. I had never had a more terrifying moment of my life until then, and it was worse. I could tell that it had touched me. In the end, my friend thought I was nuts, and we lost contact. But now it seems that whatever is happening to me, whoever or whatever is following me, might never stop. It was only a couple of months ago that I moved into my flat with my boyfriend. It was maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I decided I'd had enough, decided to write out this short story about my hauntings. I've been running in circles as I attempt to address questions for which I have no answers, and it was the other week that I felt maybe it's going too far. My boyfriend was working in Glasgow, which is a half-hour train ride away. It was about 9 o'clock at night, and it was dark. It was just me and my cat in the house, and I was doing my makeup, getting ready to go out. I was holding my small mirror in my hand in front of me, when I heard my cat make a really weird noise. I went through to the bedroom, and she looked terrified, hiding behind the blinds. You weird cat, I thought to myself. I looked around to see what may have disturbed her. I opened the walk-in cupboard for her, which needs to be pulled and pushed really hard as it gets jammed. Then I went back to the living room and sat down on my couch, leaving the bedroom door open for me to see through. I carried on doing my makeup, looking in my small mirror while putting on foundation. Suddenly, there was a huge, very loud bang as if a door had actually been slammed shut. I looked up, and it was the cupboard door, and I could clearly see my cat sitting on the bed staring at it. This is when I got really scared, and I looked back down at my makeup mirror to close it and put everything down. There was a huge crack going through the mirror. I didn't know what else to expect. I didn't know what else to do except shout at my cat and take her outside, which I did. I told my boyfriend everything, and it was only a few days later that the windows started unlocking by themselves. It's been really scary to experience this so often. I'd appreciate anyone's help or comments. This is one of the scariest things to happen to me as a kid, and it's always stuck with me. It was about 10 years ago when I was 9 years old. I had just moved back to California with my family. We were to be living with my grandmother in a cramped 2-bed, 2-bathroom place, and I was excited. My grandma was an older, pretty religious Filipino woman, a converted Hindu and faithful Catholic. I'm not sure if that's a contradiction, because I don't know much about either religion, but her house had lots of shrines, candles, paintings of Jesus and Hindu gods, and this overall weird energy that I could palpably feel as a kid. It's important to note that I now consider myself a very open person, someone who may unknowingly attract these sorts of occurrences. This may not be important to the story, or maybe it is, I'm not entirely sure. But as a child, I would hear music and voices whispering to me, as well as smell strange things when triggered by certain words. At the time of this event, this was something I was used to and knew about myself. Because of this, I had some interest in Wicca and the occult. Not as much as I would later have, because I was still a child, but enough to often sit on the floor of my aunt's dimly lit and cramped room and look at her books on witchcraft. I don't know why and when, but around that time, I began to have super strange, frequent, and all-encompassing thoughts of the devil and demons, like it would always be running through my mind, and I would comfort myself by remembering to recite some of the Hail Mary my mother had taught me. My aunt's room had a really creepy, suffocating feel to it, but I'd always spend time up there even though I felt as if there was someone watching me. I could place the energy coming from in front of her closet. My aunt is mentally ill and at the time was not on meds, so her room was filled with stuff, but especially the closet. It was always open a couple of feet or so with lots of her things kind of stuffed in and falling out, and it was always pitch black on that side of the room, especially in the closet from what I could see. I slept up there with her and was so jumpy and afraid all the time that I couldn't even shower by myself. One night, my aunt went out and my mother, my little brother, and I went to sleep on her bed. I remember I was so afraid, and I couldn't stop staring at this creepy green fairy thing that my aunt had hung from a string near her bed. It always seemed to sway, and I felt that when I looked in its eyes, it was sentient or something. I was in between my mom and brother, but sleeping the opposite way from them, at their feet, staring at the space near the closet. I fell asleep, and in my dream, I woke up. I sat straight up and felt such dread and fear. I'll never forget it. In the dream, I tapped my mom awake, and she looked at me in surprise and said, "Ayana, you're bleeding." I then felt my nose and realized blood was dripping from it. Then my eyes, my ears, and my mouth. I got super freaked out and said, "Mommy, I've been thinking about the devil a lot," and something along the lines of how I couldn't stop and was really scared. But by the time I was done talking, she actually laid back down and went back to sleep. Then, in a moment of fucking horror, something was on top of me. It was dark and I couldn't see, but I remember thinking it was a little white man. He was sitting on my chest with his knees on my collarbones, growling, hissing, making terrifying noises while literally, and I mean literally, was choking the absolute hell out of me. I was trying to flail my arms around, but I couldn't move. It lasted so long, I remember thinking, "Oh my God, when will this end?" And then, as suddenly as that, I woke up for real. I was laying on my back, breathing heavily and feeling sore, in the exact same spot as the dream. Briefly, I thought, "Oh no, is this real? Is it going to happen again?" So I laid down in silence until I could muster the courage to turn and look at the closet. I felt absolutely horrified. The space was radiating the most intense, deep hate and evil. I'll never forget, it stuck with me for so long. I could just feel something staring at me intensely, and also I had the sense that it knew that I knew it was there, that we were looking at each other in that moment. I rubbed my mom's hip for comfort and laid back down, immediately starting on a Hail Mary. I said it over and over until I could fall back asleep. For some reason, I also felt, although I was sleeping, that whatever it was left. I could just sense it walking out of the room. When I woke up, I went to stand near the closet, and the space now felt kind of empty. Anyway, I grew up and forgot about this story. I used to tell it to friends for a scary laugh. But I've just finished my first year of college and moved back here for the summer, so it's been on my mind. This wasn't even the most frightening thing to happen in this house, so we'll see if any other future things happen. Hopefully not. When I was a kid growing up in the late 90s, one of my best friends lived in a rural part of town. We met because he went to the same school, but he lived miles away from my more suburban neighborhood. We're still friends to this day, and we still talk about what happened on this night. We decided to have a camp out in the woods behind his house. His family didn't have a ton of land, but they had a pretty decent patch. And honestly, I have no idea who owned the land behind him, but for whatever reason, there was this old greenhouse about a quarter of a mile behind where his property ended, and it became the woods. It was just this old wooden building with windows and a fireplace, and I guess maybe somebody probably did live there at some point in time, but no one used it anymore, and we kind of turned it into our own little fort. We were 15 at the time and decided to spend the night out in our fort and have a fire and just do what kids do. We snuck a couple of 2 liters of wine coolers from his parents' fridge and thought we were being total badasses. Lol. It was a Saturday night in July when we did this. We went out to the fort in all seasons, but we never thought about staying out there until the summer. His parents and my parents were cool with it, so we made our way back there after we had dinner with his family. I brought my ghetto blaster, and we were just going to play music and hang out. We got a campfire going, and all was well with the music of the day playing on my ghetto. Probably some rap stuff that we were into back then. We were laughing and talking about a job that we wanted to get when we were 16, but we were also talking about the 2 girls we were dating at the time. This is going to sound cheesy, but there was a game that we played called MASH. You wrote the letters M-A-S-H on the top of a piece of paper, and then you had 5 different lines on one side of the paper, 5 different lines on the other side of the paper, and then 5 lines at the bottom. The first set on the left were supposed to be filled with the names of girls you thought were hot. The other set of lines on the right side were supposed to be jobs you would like to have in your future. And then finally, the 5 spaces at the bottom of the page were supposed to be just random numbers that would equal how many kids you would have. At the top of the page, the M stood for mansion, the A stood for apartment, the S stood for shack, and the H stood for house. You had to pick a random number, and the person you were playing with would use that number to go through all of the lines in the letters and cross them out systematically. Gosh, I hope this is making sense. Anyway, at the end of the game, you would end up with one of the letters, one of the girls you thought was the hottest, the job you really wanted, and the number of kids you would have. Part of the fun was we always made sure that some of the answers had to be outlandish. For example, 67,000 kids, or some crazy woman that you would never have any business being with. My friend, whom I'll call Eric for this story, started off the game and picked a bunch of funny things, and we were laughing before we even got the silly game going. He ended up with Sharon Stone as his wife, and they would live in a shack with 7 kids, and he would be a school teacher. We were dying of laughter. Right about that time, though, we heard a noise from the woods behind the fort. As I said, his place was very rural, and outside of the 1/4 to a half mile into the woods where this place was from his house, it was another 6 or 7 miles to the next road where people lived. It was rare for anybody to see anyone out there, save for a pond where some people once in a while would go fishing. The fishing there sucked. I don't think it was stocked, so like I said, it was rare. What we heard, though, was the sound of footsteps walking through the forest, the cracking of branches and the crushing of leaves. At first we thought, maybe it's his older brother coming out to scare us, or maybe even just wanting to hang out. But when we called out and said, "Hey, who's there?" no one answered, and the footsteps stopped. I said, "Hey, I think this is weird," and Eric said, "Hey, just chill out," and he gave me another plastic cup full of Bartles and James wine cooler. Yeah, okay, wine coolers, don't make fun of us. We sat listening for a while, and everything was still quiet, so we turned the music back on, and then decided to play another game of MASH. For whatever reason, I also decided to have Sharon Stone as one of the girls on my list. After the random number elimination, she ended up also being my wife. We were dying of laughter again. When I look back, I remember that Sharon Stone was like one of the hottest women in entertainment, so it was kind of obvious that we would pick her and put her onto the list. When the fire started to die down, we decided to go inside the fort and go to sleep. A while before this, we had dragged an industrial carpet out to the fort, so we just threw our sleeping bags on top of that and were going to talk ourselves to sleep listening to music. About an hour after we went into the fort, we started to hear the footsteps outside again, and no doubt about it, they were coming towards the fort. I whispered to Eric, "Hey, there really is somebody out there." And he responded, "Yeah, man, I know." We talked about making a run for it, but we didn't know who it was, or maybe it was just a deer, and maybe we were just being little girls. But after a few minutes, we heard the sounds of those footsteps right outside the fort, and suddenly, the entire building started to shake as if there was an army of guys outside. Whoever it was just shaking the hell out of it. Then we heard this crazy laughter, and I won't lie, I scooched over closer to Eric in my sleeping bag because I was scared. He was too. You know, even when you're 15 and you think you have the world by the ass, when something really scary happens, you don't always act like a tough guy. The shaking finally stopped after like 5 minutes, and we yelled out, "Hey, leave us alone. Get out of here. We'll just go if you want us to leave." We heard the footsteps slowly retreat back into the woods, and we just laid there for another hour or so, scared stiff and not knowing what to do. Finally, I crawled out of my sleeping bag and went to the fort door, pushed it open, and saw that the fire was starting to kick up a little bit again, but it was mostly just embers. We were leaving it that way so we could make breakfast in the morning. But what terrified me was what I saw on a tree right next to where we were having our fire. Impaled into the tree with an old rusty trowel was a piece of paper, and on the piece of paper was written in a very childish scrawl, "You both can't be married to Sharon Stone." I went back into the fort to see Eric getting out of his sleeping bag and told him we needed to get out of there. And we did. We put out the fire and then ran back to his house and slept on the back porch. In the morning, his father came out and said, "Hey, what happened to sleeping at the fort?" We told him what happened, and yeah, he saw the old garden trowel or whatever stabbed into the tree and what was written on that note. I have no idea who was out there that night or who decided to listen into our entire conversation and then leave that threatening piece of paper that, quite frankly, looked like it had been written in blood, as if someone had pricked their finger and then wrote it on the piece of paper. I never went back to that fort, and neither did Eric. If I recall correctly, his parents forbade anybody from going back there. Anyway, that happened a long time ago, but I still replay it in my head like it was yesterday.